Hey everyone, glad to be back here with the live after shows. I've been gone for a minute as I have been out of the country, but I am back now. I'm a little bit under the weather tonight, but hopefully that shouldn't affect things too much. That's why I'm not on cam. But I just got finished watching the debate tonight on Standing for Truth channel with Kent Hovind, who is now channelless, and Luca from Italy on whether or not there's evidence of common universal ancestry. And I have to say, it went just about how I would think it would go. I mean, based on what I know of Ken Hovind at this point, having done multiple debates with him, Luca did make good arguments. I enjoyed it, but Kent is not going to be swayed by such arguments like that. He's heard these arguments before. I mean, some of it was a little bit technical with mitochondria, but there weren't really very many moments where I felt like his feet were actually held to the fire or he was caught off guard or, he basically would just pull up a PowerPoint for every response. So, yeah, exactly like Lorraine Drosophila is saying. It's all just incredulity on his side of the argument, which, eventually I would like to see some creationists move past just a raw feeling of incredulity to justify their position. But hopefully we may see some of that tonight. I still am hopeful that some creationists will be joining the after show tonight. But if not, I'm sure that we can have a fruitful discussion. A rational empiricist might join later as he wanted to help me with some debate prep for an upcoming debate on modern day debates. So hopefully that will manifest. But I'm hoping that some creationists will join in the meantime, make things a little bit interesting and spicy, or some other atheists as well, just to discuss the after show or really any topic in the debate. So yeah, I mean, nothing really new was said on Kent Hovind's side tonight. That is not a surprise by any means. I don't think that he's really said anything new in multiple years at this point. But it was interesting to see after all of these, you know, th- these articles and this press coverage that Kent and Dinosaur Adventureland have been getting recently, and with the banning of his channel, it was kind of interesting to see him back. Although, obviously he's going at for a business as usual approach. Mum's the word. He doesn't want to discuss anything that's being talked about. He doesn't want to discuss the impending lawsuits that he's going to be facing. He doesn't want to discuss his channel being taken down, other than to say that it's a new world order conspiracy against him. Which, sure, Kent, sure. Um, so, it was a little bit I was hoping that we might get something, to address it, but obviously that was a little bit overly optimistic, as we got the same old Kent that we always get. Some of the questions, though, were pretty interesting. I think, Taylor asked about the bacterial flagellum, being an efficient motor. There was Mark Reed brought up ERVs, and there were a lot of interesting discussions that came out from that. But ultimately, it's the same old Kent show as it's always been. So that's why I was hoping maybe, there might be some creationists that would want to come and join the discussion to continue the debate. But we will see if any such brave souls come forward. So let's see. Yes, Ken sticks to the basics. I would potentially disagree that it's a really good tactic, but it certainly does drive his point across. I think we're all familiar with Kent's basic rhetorical toolbox because he's always using the exact same arguments. So I don't know if it's actually a good tactic or if it's working, but it's certainly effective in getting people to understand the points he's trying to make are. I mean, where I could basically do a Kent Hovind debate right now with just me giving a funny voice for Kent Hovind. I think I could do an all right job of simulating an entire Kent Hovind debate. And, if it was typed out, maybe people wouldn't even see the difference. Um, let's see. What was the deal with the endosymbiosis of mitochondria? Why did Donnie keep repeating it? I think it was because Donnie was trying to clarify for his audience, who maybe, is more of a lay audience, and Donnie was trying to make sure that people in the audience were understanding the points that Luca was making. Maybe he thought that people were not understanding Luca's arguments. That's the only really explanation I can think of because you're right. Donnie did interrupt the debate several times in order to try to clarify Luca's positions on endosymbiosis and mitochondria and what those terms are. I mean, I think everybody knows what mitochondria are. I mean, we're kind of driven into our heads in high school. They're the powerhouse of the cell. But if he wants to try to explain what mitochondria are as by saying that they're ancient bacteria, sure. I guess I don't take any umbrage with that. Um, let's see. Yeah, ERV's SFT must be going nuts. Yeah, I don't know how he does it. For somebody to moderate a debate on a topic that they're very passionate about and have a lot of things to say. I mean, Donnie has literally written an entire book, which I've unfortunately read on ERVs. So I know he has a lot to say on the matter. I don't think that I would be able to moderate a debate like Donnie does. I would not be able to just sit on my hands and not say anything. So I totally understand him intervening a couple times. Lorraine says, still bugging me to make an ATP argument. Can't wait to hear. Yeah, I definitely have plans on making a based theory about ATP. I think it's a really cool molecule. It's not my favorite molecule. Obviously, I mean, I think DNA is probably most people's favorite molecule, but ATP got to be right up there. Also, Luca is here in the house. Hey, Luca, great job tonight. And Mark Reed is joining. Hey, Mark.
Hello, how are you, sir? So good to see you, Grayson.
Yeah, well, you can't really see me, but I'm a little bit under the weather. I don't know if I
Well,
sound a little bit more nasally tonight or not, but
fine, fine. It's good to hear you then. All right, if you want to get pedantic, sure. No,
it's
I think
I was
Luke did a
just
great job.
debating with, Redefine Living in the chat, so I think maybe some of the
Oh,
pedantics have rubbed off on me.
why? Why? Like, why?
I know it
I've got
was
that
really
guy
coming
blocked.
down to
I've
him
had him.
saying, "You cannot make any universal statements unless you've literally like, you can't make a universal statement about humans, like all humans have parents, unless you've physically inspected it for every single human that's ever existed." So
That's not how induction works, sir. That is
exactly.
not how induction works. Induction says that if we see an event repeated enough, we can make a confident claim that that is what happens under these set of circumstances. That's called induction.
Exactly.
It's the
I was trying to
it's
make
the
that point and saying, "Okay, would you accept if I am 99.999% sure rather than, like, saying I'm 100% sure this is a universal statement?" And he kind of
right.
just refused to respond to that, honestly. He didn't ever address it.
Uh, he's a troll. I blocked him after. I think he was the first person I blocked from Standing for Truth because sort of I said something and then we went on to Amy's after show and he completely lied about what I said, just
Yeah.
blatantly lied,
He
and then
did the
sort of
same
laughed
to
about
me
it.
tonight.
Yeah, he has for somebody that believes he shouldn't bear false witness, he does an awful lot of bearing false witness. So I'm very familiar with the guy
He
that you're
was
talking
trying
about.
to make the claim that I somehow claimed that I can explain every aspect of the universe independent of God, and I have all
Right,
the answers, and if I don't, then obviously I cannot be, obviously my worldview is fraudulent if I don't have literally every answer to
right,
everything.
right. So that's where he'll outright lie about it, and sort of it's not even at the point of misrepresentation, like even the slight misrepresentation. He will flat out lie about what you've said and what you've claimed. So just block him. He's not worth your time. He knows that he's lying because he laughs about it afterwards. He's really not worth your
Well,
time,
I mean,
Grayson.
people
Honestly, man.
seem to the most watched long format debate on my entire channel was with Redefined Living. So I don't know if people like and enjoy those debates. I really have no idea. It wasn't particularly enjoyable to me to have these
Yeah,
pedantic
fair
little
enough.
arguments, but
I don't
speaking
know.
of,
I
that's
don't
not really
do a
fair
lot
for
of.
John Doe, but I wanted to read out his question because I've never heard anybody
Sure,
ask
sure.
this before. He says, "Why don't evolutionists believe that deities can exist? You don't think that Q could have evolved? It makes no sense to me. If you believe anything is possible, you vehemently call yourselves atheists." Anyone want to take that? Because I've never heard
Oh
of anyone
yeah,
saying, "Couldn't God have
yeah.
evolved?"
So, well, yeah, that's the whole point. It depends what you're defining as God. Sure, a God could evolve. There's no reason to think a God evolved. But the problem here, John Doe, your main problem is saying, why don't evolutionists believe that deities exist? But um, there are theists that believe in evolution, right? So there's a ton of people, even working within evolutionary science, that believe in a God. They are religious. They are theists. They are Christians and Catholics and Islamic people and all kinds of people. So some of them do think that deities exist, not just can exist, but do in fact exist. You're sort of conflating this idea that evolution has somehow been put in there by atheists, which are a tiny minority of the population. That's not the case. It's that is the scientific consensus among everybody, including religious people. This is the thing you've got to understand. It's not an atheistic thing. Evolution is just a scientific thing. And I'm really sorry, but there's tons of theists, people that believe in God, that also know evolution is a fact because we observe it, and there's tons of evidence for it. I'm
That's a
I'm
great
really
point.
sorry, but your question is kind of malformed. Um, it, 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 to believe anything is possible, right? So yeah, so when you believe something, um, you have to have sort of a positive leaning towards it. So um, we don't believe anything is possible. There's some things that are logically impossible, like a married bachelor and things like that. But usually the atheist will say, hey, there's nothing logically impossible about a God. There's nothing inherently flawed about the idea as far as logic is concerned. However, there's no evidence to believe in a God, and there's a lot of evidence, like the problem of evil, to sort of make it seem like there isn't a God. So that's why we believe there's no God, or do not believe there's a God, is because the atheist doesn't have that evidence to show that it is real. We don't just believe anything is possible, and we don't just believe anything at all. It's just what do we have evidence for? And I'm sorry, but a God isn't it. Anyway, I've been talking too much. You go,
Yeah, so
Grayson.
I'll agree with you there, Mark. 100%, or maybe I should say 99.99999% to avoid any
Yeah,
universals. But yeah, no, I pretty much agree with you. I mean, I've never said that God is impossible. There's lots of things that are logically possible. I've said before, I think that a leprechaun could have farted out the universe. Sure, it's possible. Why not? I don't have evidence to support that. But we have another comment here from John, who says that he will give me a cookie if next time I say to not a Dr. Kent Hovind that nobody has ever seen a god produce a non-god. John, you will owe me a cookie, good sir.
that's a really good point. It's something I've made before, but that's really good wording of it to sort of parody what Kent says. Like we've never seen a god create anything either. He sort of says, "Hey, we've never seen a bacteria turn into an elephant." Well, we've never seen a god, create something from nothing either, or humans from dust either. But you believe that. But I love that we've never seen a god create a non-god. That's beautiful, John. I love it. John's
Yeah, I'll
awesome.
be
He's
interested to see
absolutely
how he
awesome. Yeah.
answers that.
Yeah.
So here's an interesting question from Lorraine. What's the oldest evidence of a supernatural belief? Is it a 50,000-year-old burial in Israel? And even that is an assumption. So that's an interesting question. I would think that beliefs would predate humanity, would be my intuition about it. I mean, we've seen chimpanzees demonstrate some level of supernatural belief before. So
Right.
I would see that it would probably predate humanity. Could go back to Australopithecus, could go back even further. Tough to say, but I don't know the archaeological evidence for the most definitive, um, evidence of a supernatural belief being demonstrated in the archaeological record.
Yeah, I don't know what it would be. I know, being Australian, that the Australian Aboriginals, the native people to Australia, they have sort of beliefs that go back a very long way, at least 45,000 years. The Dreamtime and the Rainbow Serpent, which is their sort of origin myth kind of thing. But I'm not sure about what the oldest in the world is. But yeah, I would agree with Grayson. They were probably, if not around before humans, definitely before Homo sapiens. So Homo habilis and things like that. Absolutely.
So this is an interesting, and I pretty much agree with Rocius here that God is 99.9% impossible because we have to make room for the myriad of other improbable ideas. So I think that pretty
Yeah,
succinctly summarizes what we were talking about earlier.
sure.
Taylor
Yeah, if
K
you
is
don't
in
want to
the
have
building.
bias. Yeah. Hi, Taylor.
Hey, Taylor. Okay, so rational empiricist. Sorry, I hope you're not feeling too ignored. I added you onto the stream a little while ago, but I'll just formally introduce you here. Um, I
Oh,
did.
no worries.
I really enjoyed your contribution in that open mic with Kent on Praise's channel. I
I,
uploaded it on.
I'm flattered that thank you for your comments, and I appreciate you uploading that into a more succinct, watchable form than
Yeah, I really
the whole
enjoyed it,
stream.
especially. I don't know if you saw at the very end there, but just when Mark, to give you some background here. Um, A rational empiricist was literally doing exactly what Kent has always asked. He stuck to one topic, a very, very specific topic about the Aeolian formation of sandstone.
Yep.
And Kent
Right.
continued to try over and over again to change the topic, saying,
Yep.
"Oh, do you believe in a dot of nothing exploding?" And it was just comical at how, I really have to applaud a
Mm.
rational empiricist for not uh, taking the bait and holding his feet to the fire and staying on topic. Because honestly,
Oh,
I
thanks.
probably would have just gone with the punches and I would have started talking
Oh, well
about
done.
dot of nothing.
Yeah,
Did you clip it? I mean, I'll watch it on your channel,
Yes,
Grayson, if
it's
it's
on
there. I
it's on
don't
my
yeah,
channel
usually.
it
right
was on.
now. It's like I uploaded a video today, but it's my most recent video before that. I
Right.
have like my little
No, I will
interaction
watch
with
it.
Kent
Yeah.
at first, and then I have a rational
Mm.
empiricist at the end. But I enjoyed I enjoyed a rational empiricist portion of the debate actually more than I enjoyed my own. I thought he did a
Well,
great job.
I think you did pretty good, Grayson. Yeah, I think Kent was um maybe a little more. What's a good way of putting it? He was more used to. Oh, hey, Brady. He was more
Hey,
used to kind of
Bree.
what you were saying. So he what am I trying to say?
Oh yeah, he had canned
Yeah,
responses, but even his canned responses were
yeah.
absolutely loony. Mark will agree.
His
I don't know if
idea
you
about like
guys.
the whole idea of the Earth like sloshing around like a tide.
Yeah.
He needs to
Mark
check
and
the
Bree.
expiration dates on some of those cans, y'all.
Yeah.
So Mark and
I think
Bree.
they're well past you. Yeah.
Yeah. So in this, Kent was actually trying to say that the fossil footprints that we find for
Yeah,
terrestrial animals in the Grand Canyon were formed during the flood because apparently a patch of dry land was
yeah.
continuously
Patches of
shifting
dry land
around.
existed.
And so the flood would deposit some layers and then animals would walk on top of it and then the flood would come back around and deposit more layers.
Ooh,
this is
it's actually
this is the
not just
explanation.
that because there's newer layers on top above that have burrows in them. So
Right.
it's
Yes.
it's the animals
Right.
walked on that, the flood flush washed back, then some burrowing animals came along and
Yeah.
burrowed
Time to make
into it.
burrows.
And then in
And
between
really
what
interestingly, I really did
How
not
did they
expect this.
survive?
Yeah, I really did not expect this, but I actually even corrected Kent on the Bible in that exchange. I'm not a Bible expert. I don't know anything about the Bible, but I couldn't believe it when he said that um, Noah didn't release any birds from the ark for a full year. And I said,
What?
no, he did it multiple times
No.
continuously, starting at like 40 days. And I couldn't believe,
Yeah,
like,
it was a raven, then a
yeah,
dove. I think
a
yeah,
raven,
they were
yes.
different birds as well. Yeah.
And I just
that's
couldn't
part of
believe.
my that's part of my argument against Kynes, because if our most people would take the argument back to the family level, but then you're talking about these different birds that were already distinct by this time that are all in like the group with the passerines, right? This kind of neo-aves group that or avis group that has like modern features, and there were two of them. There were at least two of them. So how many birds were there exactly? Anyway, I'm throwing
Yes,
off the
Lorraine,
subject.
just to answer the question in the comments here, it is the video titled An Impromptu Debate. So that's in the
Yeah.
title of the video.
Actually, I've
So
used the same tactic as rational empiricist, sort of against Kent with his evolution thing. I just stick to ERVs because he doesn't have anything to rebut it. He
He's
just
not used to
basically
it, no.
says, well, he basically says we don't know it, and then he consults sort of Donnie's work, which Donnie's entire argument against ERVs is, oh, they're beneficial, and it's like, yeah, they're co-opted. We know this is the case. Like that doesn't refute, and it
Lots of
doesn't
people have
explain
tackled his whole ERV stuff, to be honest.
Yeah, so this doesn't explain how the actual viral DNA got there. And I know I sent that question into Kent because I know he hates it, and he had the slides up before he was even asked the question. So either A, Donnie's feeding him these questions, which maybe is true, maybe not, or B, he's got people watching for the question to send him, hey, it's going to be about this, and he gets the slides up in preparation, which is probably
kind of
more likely.
Heartwarming in his own heartwarming to me, and in his own special way, his own twisted way, Kent is actually trying to learn something in terms of what
I'm going to
Donnie
try
is telling
something.
him.
I'm going to try something really quick, and I'm going to try to explain ERVs very quickly and simply. So ERVs are endogenous retroviruses. Okay, big word, doesn't matter. ERVs is fine. They're a portion of the DNA that has viral-like characteristics. There are portions of the ERV which are clearly viral genome elements. We know this because we can see viruses infect organisms today, and we see that they are inserting ERV elements into the host organism's genome. So by comparing which animals have what ERVs in common, that reconstructs the phylogenetic tree that we would expect if evolution were true. And this is different than just saying they're genetic similarities because of common design, because the vast majority of ERVs don't exhibit any kind of function that we can see, or their function is not clearly related to their ERV elements. So it's like a genetic similarity argument, but in not using genes.
On it, if you do need me to go through it on ERVs.
Sure, yeah, be my guest.
Well, it's up to you. I mean, I don't want to. I just found the PowerPoint presentation.
I was just trying to answer very quickly and succinctly. So if you had maybe something that you wanted to add or something you thought I left out.
So yeah, I'll just do the PowerPoint real quickly. Go through it. Probably better than the best.
I will say, Grayson, it does appear you've attracted some creationist faces in the side chat now.
Really, I wish that they would join the actual discussion here. But
by the way, I hope is my audio coming in okay?
Yes, it is.
I haven't used StreamYard in a while.
So Taylor, just to clarify, like 99% of ERVs exhibit no known function. Donnie likes to point out the 0.01% of ERVs which have developed functions, or which were already functional when they were first infected. So it's really a question about fractions
that are detrimental to.
Yes, so it's a question about fractions. When Donnie says that ERVs are functional, it's very misleading because he's talking about 0.01% of ERVs, and he's trying to act like he's talking about all ERVs. So that's why it's very misleading. You have to be aware of the fraction of what amount of ERVs are functional compared to the total. I'll also just say, at least in my translation of the Bible, Noah releases the raven after 40 days.
Yes. I'm sharing my screen. I'm not sure if that's coming up or not.
I see it right here. Sorry about that, Mark.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no worries. So basically, this is the process that you've got this virus's RNA, and it inserts itself into the human genome. So this viral RNA gets inserted. So we know from this this sequence here that there's part of our DNA that is viral, and mostly from these long terminal repeats on either side, we can tell that that's a viral element. As the virus gets infected and passed down, it endogenizes when it basically becomes standard, when it becomes a normal part of our DNA. And all of this is natural, and it's actually can be a really good thing. when it does get passed down, because what can happen is the viral sequence can get mutated. Now, mutation is when a family has a child and some of their DNA is randomly switched or randomly different, kind of thing. But that can happen to the DNA from the virus that's been inserted into humans. So it can change, and occasionally it changes so it's a better version. It's helpful in some way. So that's what we call co-option. So these usually a retrovirus is really bad, but because it can mutate into something that actually helps us. And all of this is a bit complicated, so I'll leave it there. But I just wanted to explain how, like, where it came from. It came from these viruses, and even though viruses are usually bad, if it mutates into something good, we keep it. We basically will do better, and it will get passed down again and again and again.
Sometimes they can bring DNA from different organisms to help a different. When you get an E.R.V, it can bring in. I know that they've white flies have had a plant gene inserted into them to make them immune to the toxins in the plant, and also helps them to produce the toxins themselves to keep their predators away. So they have plant genes inserted into them. Really cool stuff. ERVs can do amazing functions.
So how we know how this supports evolution is that we find that these exact viral sequences in different animals, like, for instance, like you'll find a certain ERV sequence in both us and cows, for instance. Now, it's in exactly the same place and is exactly the same viral sequence. So we know that the chances of that happening independently over all these animals is so large. It's so improbable. It's so unlikely that the same virus attacked the same animals at exactly the same place in their DNA is so improbable. It just couldn't happen. The other explanation is that before, say, cows and humans split off, they were infected way back then. And something happened to mutate that ERV, and it became beneficial. And because it was beneficial and because it helped, both the cow and the human's ancestor kept that. They split off from one another, but it kept the same viral element in both the cow and the human. And then that's how we got it. And that is a way better explanation than all of these viruses just happen to infect at the same place in every single animal.
Yes.
So that's why it's really good. It's probably the strongest evidence for common ancestry.
Yeah, so just to drive that point home, it's the patterns that we see in the sequence and the location of these ERVs throughout the genomes of all species on Earth. And, well, all species that can get infected by an ERV. But it's the patterns that we see that reproduce the phylogenetic patterns that we would expect of evolution. That is the reason why ERVs are such strong evidence for evolution. The reason why they are not strong evidence for common design is because there's not function in the vast majority of them. And to say that all ERVs are functional, like Donnie or like Kent will have to say, it is a completely faith-based assertion. They just have to believe that all ERVs are functional because that's what their worldview says if it's common design.
Even if they are all functional, it's kind of beside the point, because you don't have to have them in the same genetic location for them to be functional or have the same sequence. That's not how genetics works usually.
Right. And there's another reason why it's not designed, and that's because of the long terminal repeats on either end.
Right. So I was about to mention that. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Rational Empiricist. I don't want to.
No, go ahead. My take on it will probably be different than yours.
When any retrovirus, it doesn't matter whether it's been endogenized or put into the population or not. Any retrovirus, what it does is it makes a cut in the DNA of its host with an enzyme called integrase. Now, this integrase, when it does make the cut, it makes a repeat of the DNA around it. So it basically causes a repeat to happen. So it duplicates it. Now, when the virus transmits itself, so when the virus produces more of itself, it doesn't include the long terminal repeat. It doesn't include this repeat of the DNA sequence. So the only way it can get there is when integrase makes a cut in that DNA. And so why would a designer design a property of DNA to make it look like integrase has made a cut there without it actually happening? You would actually have to argue that the God designed this DNA sequence with the elements of a virus, and then also designed the outside of the viral element with the long terminal repeats, simulating that integrase made a cut in it, which seems incredibly unlikely.
Yeah, and speaking to Taylor's point here about, is it possible if all of these ERVs do have a function and we just don't know what they are? I'm going to ignore the point about vestigial organs for now, but I would just say that some of these ERV elements do have like recognizable like genes within them, but they're degraded to the point where they're no longer functional. They're broken. And the key here is that they're broken in the same way among evolutionary clades.
Right.
So
But they're not always completely broken, though. I mean, let's not oversell it, right? There's you can have it.
No,
It's still
not
functioning because, like Mark was saying, it'll duplicate that sequence that it's cut out. So it'll still try to replicate the function through. Anyways, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to barge in there.
Some elements of it can be functional, but I don't think we've ever found a complete ERV that has the same original function.
yeah, like
So
even in the case of syncytin, even in the case of syncytin, which is a functional gene within an ERV element, the actual aspects of the ERV element, like the long terminal repeats, are not necessary for its function as a syncytin protein.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know. So I'm gonna believe you guys.
And I'll just address this point really quick. Big Bang Mana is saying that the functions are irrelevant, the insertion locations are the key. And I'll just say that according to many creationists, the insertion locations are a part of the function. They will make the claim that these ERVs have to be in these locations that they are for some kind of functional purpose.
Yeah.
And that is what they have faith in.
Why are there so many ERVs that don't have any function at all, though, that are just like dead? Like,
well, again, they have faith that they do have a function, and we just don't know it. It's a faith-based belief.
We'll eventually discover it, all the functions.
Yeah, so they allude a lot to the whole idea of junk DNA, which is sort of a lot of DNA that we thought had no purpose. We found out some of them did. I'm not going to say that maybe there's some we don't know the function, and maybe it does have a function. That's possible, but there are some cases of ERVs where we know they definitively have no function whatsoever.
I had really never heard the term junk DNA before I started interacting with intelligent divine people.
I have. Yeah, I have. Yeah, I'd heard that term thrown around a lot.
I think it at least became more on the stage, so to speak, after creationists started butchering it.
Oh, sure, yeah. It's kind of a before we really knew that much about epigenetics kind of thing. We didn't think they sort of had a function, and the function the gene is expressed in terms of the environment around them kind of thing. So they do have functionality, but that's just because the whole idea that there is X amount of junk DNA doesn't mean the entire thing of there is DNA in your system which doesn't need to be there. You can literally replace one genome with another one, or one sequence with another one, and nothing will change. Like it just does nothing. That is a thing.
So I'll just point out to that something that Standing for Truth has actually told me in response to that is that he'll just say, "Oh, but the circumstances from which we would see a functional difference don't come about in the laboratory setup." He has faith that there's some kind of circumstance that could come about where then we would see the functional difference.
So
But
it's just that
all faith.
we haven't
And
had the
just really quick,
the right environmental pressure to act on it.
Sounds
To
like
cause
some
Yes.
it to-
special
to
pleading.
Okay,
cause
so he
it-
has a lot of faith in that. But just really quick, I just want to welcome Leo Filius in the chat and just want to let him know that so Leo and I will be doing a debate on Modern Day Debate on the Big Bang against
Nice.
Sal and Rebecca. And
Oh, that's right. You've got that with Sal coming up. What
yes,
does Sal
and so
know
a
about
rational empiricist actually,
cosmology?
yeah, a rational empiricist actually mentioned me and said that he has had a conversation with Sal on the Big Bang, and that he wanted to discuss some of his takeaways from that interaction. So Leo, if you wanted to jump in, it could be valuable for us, but I'll be sure to hold down the fort if you can.
Well, what I say, Leo probably already knows. I just want to make sure both parties are on the same page.
Oh, you just want to make sure I know it. Gotcha.
And
Alluding.
if you want to subscribe to Leo, he was just earlier today. He was doing a breakdown of some
he was doing
physics and
something earlier.
philosophy stuff. Yeah, it was pretty good stuff. So we had William Lane Craig and stuff on it. So yeah, if you're not subscribed to Leo, go check him out. He's
Yeah.
And I also want to
welcome to
plug
Leo out here.
I also want to plug Ian Chen is having a round 2 with Kent, so in the first week of
nice.
April. So everyone have that on your radar as well.
rock hard Kent.
Yeah, rock hard Kent, which nobody wants to think about.
Well,
I don't want to debate Kent due to the current stuff that he's doing, but I must admit I challenged him today because he went on Whack an Atheist and told the world, and Emma Thorne particularly, that he would debate them on whether DAL is a cult or not. So that is too good an opportunity for me to pass up. So I wrote in a super chat, and gave Donnie money to say, hey, you said you would debate people on whether DAL is a cult. Let's debate that, because I think that would be fascinating what you could bring up in support of DAL being a cult. Even if it's not conclusive, it certainly is quite embarrassing for Kent. But Johnny was, of course, like, oh, I can't ask that question on chat. It's like, come on, dude. Like, he's going around challenging people to debate him on cults and DAL.
I think
you could run DAL against the bite model. Has anybody done that?
No, but
seems like something that should be done. Yeah.
Do you want to elaborate on what the bite model is?
Yeah, it's a model
like
that they use to to predict, or not, to predict whether a group is a cult, and whether they're going to likely to engage in the dangerous cult activity, or to progress into dangerous cult activity. So it's called bite. What is it? It's behavioral control. What is information control, thought control, and emotional control. Yeah, those are the steps that they take to take control over their members. So we can look at the way that things are handled at DAL and put it under that scrutiny.
Yeah, I mean, look at the thought control is definitely something that Kent's going to have a problem with. Require members to internalize the group's doctrine as truth, adopting the group's map of reality as reality, instill black and white thinking, decide between good versus evil, organize people into us versus them, i.e. insiders versus outsiders. You're not doing well, Kent. But what I want to know is why does he go on and sort of say, "Hey, I'll debate this topic," and I don't feel like he's got any interest in debating that. Like he won't take it up.
Well, you won't get Donnie to host it, and where else is he going to take it to? He doesn't have his own channel to
Right.
put it on anymore.
On Rumble or BitChute.
Yeah, BitChute.
I just want to respond to this comment in the chat really quickly. I just want to say that A's philosophy definitely does not know the mathematics and probabilities involved. I mean, I hear this argument for abiogenesis mostly, but here he's doing it for evolution. But I just want to say that whatever math that you think that you're using to calculate the probabilities, maybe you should question that math and whether or not it's valid a little bit harder.
Ooh, come in here and talk to us.
Okay, what
I want a creationist in here so bad, guys. You guys are cool.
I can't believe that no creationist has joined.
Yeah. Well, usually when they talk probability, they're talking about Bayesian analysis. They're talking about Bayesian probability. Now, Bayesian probability is basically based upon if you have certain things that you allow for to start with. So if you make certain assumptions, what's the probability that stems from that? And so Bayesian analysis relies very heavily on getting those first assumptions right. So if you are doing a Bayesian probability study that says, hey, God exists and God wants to create something, the probability of a Bayesian analysis might come out very, very low. But that's assuming, it's sort of begging the question that God already exists and God already wants to create something. They do it a lot with whether Jesus was the Messiah kind of thing. They quote this Bayesian analysis, but that Bayesian analysis assumes that God is real and that he wanted to get his message to people. Richard Carrier famously did another study which didn't make those assumptions, and the Bayesian analysis said that the probability is that Jesus didn't exist at all. So Bayesian analysis only works if you know the as Leo mentioned, the priors like that led to it, and without that, it's just meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. So
this is slightly off topic, but also applying Bayesian analysis to the idea of phylogenetics and common ancestry, and in fact. Dr. Zach Hancock, who I suggest everyone go watch his videos and subscribe to him. He does some really good.
I second that.
Stuff over there. Yeah, I think you've had some discussions with him, Grayson.
He's come on the Aftershow before. Yeah.
He let's see. I don't think it was a relatively recent video, but he did do a video at one point about how it's usually kind of granted that nested hierarchies in functional genes, that could just emerge by common design. But what he did, and what I think he did really well, explained really well, was the idea that kind of the basic logic behind phylogenetics even is taking Bayesian analysis, for example, or Bayesian methods, like you were saying, Mark, applying these priors, saying, okay, if we assume for sake of argument that these organisms really are related to each other, what should we expect to see in the functional genes? We should expect these patterns that, lo and behold, we do see. So we can tell, even within functional genes, that some kind of common descent did in fact occur. So I hope I'm making sense here, but yeah.
So
I suggest everyone go watch the original video there. Yeah, he explains.
Sorry,
really quick. I know A's philosophy just joined. I'm going to introduce him.
Yeah, just have to clarify. Is it Zach B. Hancock that you're talking about?
Zach B. Hancock. Yeah.
So he's a population geneticist, and he makes really great content. Yeah, so he's a population geneticist, makes great content. I'm going to introduce Ace Philosophy, who just joined, but before that, I'm going to read two comments really quick. One is by a guy named Mitchell, who already said that we know nothing and are clueless, and he said he's going to leave. That was about 15 minutes ago. I guess he's back. He wanted to tell us that the only cult is Darwinism, forcing their belief that we're all related to coconuts and squids with no evidence whatsoever. clowns.
Darwinism hasn't
So
been a thing for
I
100
want to
years.
say, if
Yeah.
show compassion for your fellow brother in Christ, join the live stream if you want to get into it. Help out A's philosophy. He's here on 4 against 1. Help him out if you think that we're really clowns and that there's no evidence for common ancestry. And then really quickly, I just wanted to highlight one other comment. Mark, I believe that this one is for you, but I cannot be sure.
I would guess so.
But
No hair guy. Yes.
somebody
Yes.
is very well spoken. So on
Yes.
that note, Ace Philosophy, welcome to the after show. Is there anything on your mind? I know you were in the live comments.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I didn't see the debate, so I won't be able to comment on that. But
It's all right.
you know, I made a comment about mathematics and probabilities, and yeah, I think I used to believe in evolution until I started learning more about that, and I just realized that there's a chance evolution is true, but it's just an impossibly small chance, and I haven't seen any evidence that has, you know, refuted that since I first saw it. And maybe you'll be able to show me something. I don't know.
Well, why do you think it's a small chance? Like, what sort of probability study or sort of empirical observations did you put together for that
Well,
to be the case?
for evolution to be true, the protein coding sequences that are found in the genomes of every living organism would have to have arisen over time by basically mutation selection mechanisms. I don't see any other way it could have happened. But when you take everything into account about like the number of organisms that have ever lived, the number of genetic mutations that would have been passed on in any realistic model during the history of life, it doesn't really come anywhere close to being getting close to searching the permutation space of these genome sequences to find functional genome coding sequences of DNA. I just don't think.
When you did these calculations, did you take selection into account?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can assume very favorable models for evolutionary theory, which is that basically every single mutation gets selected. It's still, which is actually incredibly favorable for evolution. Like no one would assume that's the case, but if you take the estimated number of organisms that have ever lived, so even single-celled bacteria, everything, probably not including viruses. I don't think viruses are really considered the same class as living organisms. But if you
viruses aren't considered life, no.
No,
right.
they're not.
So excluding viruses, but including everything else, you know, eukaryotes, prokaryotes, and those types of organisms. Scientists have estimated how many of these things have probably ever existed. If you take every single one and say basically every single one of those organisms passed on at least one heritable new gene variation, it still doesn't come anywhere close to enough to find even a single functional short protein sequence in the DNA permutation space. So this is a huge problem because for evolution to be true, this would have needed to have happened countless, probably millions of times, but the numbers show it probably can't even happen once on a very small scale.
Wait. Are you saying that when you add up all the mutations in the entire history of the Earth, that you don't even get one functional protein as a result?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to need to see your mathematics on that because I don't think that checks out because we've literally seen new functional proteins evolve before our eyes. So we've seen that math is not true.
I wouldn't say it's evolved before our eyes. I would say, like, are you talking about give me an example?
Okay, an example is nylonase. It's an enzyme that requires a specific protein in order to break down nylon.
Now, nylon doesn't exist naturally, so it couldn't exist. Sorry, Mark. Sorry.
Right, it couldn't exist before because nylon isn't a naturally occurring substance. We found a bacteria that had evolved this nylonase in the waste outlets of a nylon factory. So it evolved that protein over the time it took for the factory to be there, and spew this effluent into a pond, essentially.
Yeah, there's also an example of a gene in HIV, in tetherin, that allowed the HIV to infect humans, and it actually involved 4 different independent mutations that had to come into place to create this. And we literally watched it happen, the evolution of an irreducibly complex system, a novel gene. We watched it happen in HIV.
Just want to say hi to Leo before we move on.
Hey, Leo.
Yeah, hi, Leo.
Howdy.
Yeah, sorry, I'm being a rude host.
I just had a quick question for A. I'm just gonna call you A if that's all right. If not, let me know, please.
Hey.
What do you mean when you say
Hey.
that? Like, so you were saying that like if we take all these processes, we still won't get a functional protein in the amount of time that not it would take even longer than the amount of time that evolution has supposedly been going on. Was I hearing you correctly?
Yes. So if we assume a 4 billion year old Earth, which is about what scientists say, if we go with all the current scientific assumptions, and I'm willing to do it, I do believe the Earth is probably very old. I believe that the Earth is at least millions or probably billions of years old. And you assume the normal time frames of life evolving, around 3 billion years ago. And you take every single, prokaryote or eukaryote that has ever lived, and it's mostly going to be prokaryotes, and you assume very favorably, for evolutionary theory, the numbers still don't come anywhere close to being sufficient to basically create a novel protein. So I've heard the myelinase example before, and something I'm not clear on is whether this isn't something that actually already existed in the organism, but just wasn't utilized until nylon came around, because myelinase could theoretically have been a pre-existing protein with a different function that also serves to break down nylon. So I don't know. I haven't looked into it, but
Well, you can.
that seems to me like something that could be a possibility.
Yeah, I'll just show the refutation that resident genius in the chat, Mitchell, has put, where he put myelinase in quotations and then added lol at the end of it. And honestly, I just don't think that we can come back from that. I don't. He's
I actually like the way it's
That's an
presented there.
argument.
It sounds like something you're going to put on a sandwich when you say it that way.
Yeah, so I think that I'll say this. Okay, from what we know about myelinase, we know the type of gene family that it evolved from. We know the plasmid in which it mutated and came from within the host genome. And we know what the other species, like what the rest of the population of this organism look like, and they do not have the myelinase gene. We can identify which exact mutations occurred in which exact plasmid in its genome occurred to create myelinase. So we know where that mutation happened, and we can compare it to other populations that don't live in the same area, but there are the same species, and they lack this gene.
So let me ask you a question. Is this myelinase, and I'm learning here, I'm trying to find out information.
Sure.
Is it like the result of a couple point mutations, or is it a completely de novo, like different, like new folds, new protein folds? Like, how different is the sequence from the previously existing organisms?
Why does that matter, though?
Because scientists do know, and this is clear, that point mutations do occur. So
I believe it was a frame shift mutation followed by some point mutations that increase its efficiency.
Okay. So those things can absolutely happen, and they do happen. There's no denying that they happen, and anyone who denies they're happening is just denying reality.
Well, I'll just say one thing really quick, is that this was so different from the genes that it evolved from, that when it was first identified, the scientists had no idea what gene family to even include it in. It was only in decades later of analysis that we found out the actual mutational pathway that created myelinase, and we found out which gene family it evolved from. But at first, it was so different that it was designated as a novel gene family.
Yeah, I can actually see that kind of happening, and we can see it. We can kind of also see it happening at the morphological scale with these, a good example is the fish without eyes.
Okay, so then mathematically, then your argument about how the total amount of mutations that have ever happened ever cannot account for a single new novel protein, we've just shown that empirically that's been demonstrated not to be true.
Not
Do you mind if I
necessarily.
ask something, Ace? Do you mind if I ask something?
Yes.
Have you actually engaged in any kind of probability study or mathematical model for this sort of claim that you're making, or is it something that you're just basing on intuition?
Well, the mathematical the demonstration of the mathematics that I'm familiar with comes in. There's a number of books that have been written about it. Like I think the earliest one was Michael Denton's Evolution, a Theory in Crisis, but also more recently is Stephen Meyer's book,
That's a
Darwin's Doubt.
book. I mean,
Yeah,
anyone can write a book, Ace. I
I
could write a
understand,
book
but
about,
the math.
anything.
If you want to know what I think is the strongest demonstration of the mathematical improbability of call it Darwinian evolution, mutation selection, evolution, I think that those are the two of the best ones. There are others that are pretty good. I think
Yeah, but
Michael.
they're just books.
I
Like I
understand that.
could produce a book today and publish it that says that aliens definitely live among
Can
us,
I
and the
clarify something
probability is
about these
high.
studies?
Well, I'm looking at a study right now using the Markov model that sort of the probability, and that's in Molecular Biology and Evolution, volume 26, saying that there's a few models and the probability is not sort of a zero number. So I'm wondering where you're getting this, because papers that I'm trying to go through sort of disagree with you.
Well,
But go ahead, Rational.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to clarify. So, would you happen, or do you happen to know if these studies or books or whatever you're citing here, do they model it in terms of a single lineage analysis, so to speak? So in terms of, okay, this gave rise to this, like a sort of a linear progression in terms of protein space, or did they model it in terms of full on populations all living together at the same time, all accumulating mutations at the same time, like
Individual unique mutations, but
right, like
Yeah,
how would
so
they
it's
factor that into account exactly?
basically, and it's been a little while since I've looked at it. It's basically, I think it's like almost like they made the models as favorable as possible. So yes, you can start it with a single lineage, and you can mutate towards a certain end goal. So they did try to take into account, like, mutation works by, like, you start with a certain limited function and then the functions improve over
but they're
time.
not. But they're not happening sequentially, right? It's not like one after another. There's multiple mutations happening in a
Right,
population
exactly.
at once,
Right. So
overlapping.
basically, yeah. So basically, it's probability. So anything could theoretically happen, but there's just looking at the likelihood. So they took into account, like, let's say you have a functional protein sequence, and whatever it is of a certain length. So proteins are made of, I think, like everyone knows, proteins are made of amino acids. Usually they're between like 100 and 1,000 amino acids long, and they took a relatively short one, and they said, what is the permutation space for this particular sequence of amino acids? And not only this particular sequence of amino acids, but any sequence which could potentially be functional according to this, like, class of proteins. And they did these experiments where they did point mutations and found that if you do, like, 5 point mutations, then functionality breaks down. So they took that into consideration and things like that. When they
This
basically
was in a
found
lab.
that, yeah, it's based on the work of a guy named Douglas Axe. And there's actually a
Wow.
20-minute video on the internet called The Information Enigma.
So can I ask you
And
something really quick, Az?
well,
If we were going to do this for a snowflake, right? We find a snowflake, we pick it, and we say, what is the probability that this exact shape snowflake developed whenever we froze this condensation? And you could calculate that it would be very, very small odds that that exact shape of snowflake would have developed. Does that mean that it's mathematically impossible for snowflakes to form? I mean,
well, here's the problem. For proteins, the better analogy for protein function is words, because the amino acid sequences basically function as letters in the words that are the protein. So a better analogy would be like kind of like monkeys trying to type Shakespeare. Like if you just randomly smash buttons on a keyboard, how long would it take for you to get a meaningful sentence or a meaningful paragraph? Is
No,
a
no,
better
this
way.
is why they asked a
And-
clarification earlier about whether or not these simulations were including selection. Because if they are
Um,
including selection,
they
that's going
are.
to drastically change the calculation.
And plus, I just want to say something. Plus, the whole point of that example that you gave, like an infinite amount of monkeys smashing on keyboards can write Shakespeare. That's the whole point of that.
I think
Yeah,
that he's
so
saying that we haven't had enough time in the history of Earth for the monkeys to type Shakespeare in his analogy.
Well, I'm not
Yeah.
sure why he's bringing up that analogy, because the whole point of that analogy is that if you have an infinite amount of monkeys smashing on keyboards, is that you can produce
That's the point, is
Shakespeare.
that you have an infinite amount of time, or you have an infinite amount of monkeys. In real life, we only have a finite number of mutations in the history of the Earth.
right.
So that's what he's trying to say. But I just want to say, like, if you had selection, right? If a monkey accidentally hits the right letter and it's in the right place, then that stays. Then then monkey's no longer
Yeah,
guessing for that letter.
and that was taken into account, because what proteins do is they're basically there's functional sequence space surrounded by a much larger, like if you take a sequence of proteins that form a functional a sequence of amino acids that form a functional protein, there, there's actually function outside of just that specific sequence. So these are these are when point mutations are introduced. We can see that many proteins still function. So they take into account like what is the range of potential sequences which would give any sort of function whatsoever, which would then lead to a selection mechanism where over time the protein would evolve into basically
Selection
complete
is the
efficiency.
mechanism, though. Selection is the
Right, but
mechanism.
the problem is this. You do have to at least get to a point where there is some function, and that is actually very difficult, because the permutation space for functional proteins is much fractionally smaller than it is for function.
So the function that's required is going to be propagation. Anything other than that is additional
Wait,
function.
Yeah, I'll
right?
just say that
It
lots
just
of
needs to be able to propagate, and that's it. If it has that function, which it did, the only ones that survive have that function. So it's kind of
I'll just say that a
tautology
lot
to
of
circle back
organic
around onto itself.
molecules, I'll just say that a lot of organic molecules have function, but that function has a fairly robust relationship to the sequence of the amino acids. So they demonstrate a very similar function regardless of the specifics of the sequence. I don't know how you would account for such robustness. Like amyloids are a good example of this. Amyloids can store information and they can self-propagate under a huge amount of different variations in their sequence.
Well, I think that's best why we a really good reason why we should focus on proteins and amino acids is because it's coded in the DNA, and they are absolutely necessary. And the sequences that code for these proteins are absolutely necessary. They would have had to have arisen by some mechanism. So we can establish a mathematical model that asks how probable is it that these sequences arose by selection mutation mechanism. And
Wait,
it is
can I clarify something? So when you said earlier that they were evolving this function, it kind of sounded like you were saying that the models they were making assumed that they originally had no function and were gaining a function. Like they didn't have a different function in the past, for example. Is that what you're saying? That they were that's how they were phrasing their analysis?
Yeah, a vast majority of proteins would have arisen from sequences with no function, because if you think about like a bacteria, it's going to have its let's try to think of a hypothetical original organism, bacteria, with a simple genome. If you want to get from that to a human, you're going to have a lot of copying of neutral DNA sequences and mutations of those spaces, which will then hopefully arise into the types of proteins that would be useful in humans and others similarly complex
I don't think
organisms.
that that's
I
a
don't think
valid
that's how that
assumption. I
works.
mean, a huge amount, I don't know what proportion, but a large proportion of new like alleles arise from a duplication of a pre-existing gene and then like differentiation from that duplication. So it's not like they're just coming out of just totally random noise
Right.
in
It's
like
not all
the
coming from neutral junk DNA.
Yeah,
so to
absolutely.
speak.
But the problem is you do have to get that original allele, that original sequence. And like I said, if you just think of the original organism, whatever it was, a single-celled organism, to get from that to a human, you'd have to admit that a number of different classes and types and folds of proteins would have to have arisen de novo at some point. Like,
well, we
No,
just
I
gave
don't
you
think
several
that's a valid
examples
assumption.
of new gene families arising from like different types of genes. Like myelinase was a great example of this. Like we've
Right.
watched this happen. We know it's not mathematically impossible.
New
Well-
protein
Once the
families
protein
come
fold
from
occurs,
pre-existing ones.
it
once
can
it occurs,
happen.
it's relatively stable. Like this is the thing. Like this is the selection. It's relatively stable. Once that protein occurs, it is a relatively stable thing, and that's the whole idea behind selection that you're sort of missing. I don't understand where you're getting the probability of 0 over the entire course of human history. I don't understand that.
It's not 0, but it's 1 in like 10 to like the 100th, which is basically 0.
Yeah, I think we're just expressing skepticism on your math and of how you're getting to those probabilities
so
because
Yeah.
I just think that they're not valid.
Well, let's
Well,
okay. Let's say
without a
okay.
specific study, like we're kind of just talking about vague claims here, if that makes
All right.
sense.
Well, I will get more specific. Let's say you're talking about a specific protein of 200 amino acids in length, and scientists have found that that a lot of proteins are very specific. You can't have too many point mutations before function fails. So let's just say there's like average 3 or 4 in 100 protein amino acid length. So that's your range. So when you have,
I'll just say that that's not accurate. Like for most
Yeah.
proteins, they're fairly robust in their sequence, and like oftentimes more than 50% of the protein can mutate without any noticeable change in function. I mean,
If you
there are
mutate
the way
the
that
active
proteins
site,
work,
for example,
the way
of
that
an
proteins and
enzyme,
enzymes
then
work is that they have active sites.
Yeah,
Certain positions in the sequence are more important than others, and the majority of the amino acids in the sequence are not very important to the overall function. So you have a robustness to handle lots of different mutations.
okay, there's going to be cases where that is true. I don't deny that, but there are also cases where you have amino acids, proteins thousands in length, and they can only handle a couple of point mutations or they
some
fail.
of them, yes, but
This
not the
is
majority of them.
again, I may be wrong about that, but this is the information that I've seen.
Okay.
So, yeah, and I don't doubt that there are cases where it's much, much more than that. But I'm just giving like a hypothetical example. So
Sure. Okay, you can continue. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just had to say that.
So there are basically 20 amino acids that are used in living organisms. I think that in some instances.
Yeah, we can agree with that.
So when you start looking at the permutation space of 100 basically instances, each with a possibility of 1 out of 20, and you can't really mutate more than a couple of these spaces. The probabilities you can that's a sequence space where the fraction of failed sequences vastly eclipses that of the functional sequences. And when you start looking at the numbers, so like you have the 100 sequences, you have, let's say there's just, look at the first amino acid. It's got to be the right amino acid out of the possible 20. So that's, you have a 1 in 20 chance. Then you go to the second one. It has to be the right one of the 20. So you take 1 over 20, and then you have 2 1 over 20.
Yeah, that is not how you would calculate these probabilities.
Hold on, let me finish. So basically,
No, that is not.
Already you're at 2 amino acids out of the 100, and the chances you're correct still at this point is 1 out of 400. So 20 times 20 is 400.
Because that's not how this works. Like that's not how proteins are formed.
In a lot of proteins, you can substitute one amino acid with another, and it will have exactly the same function.
I understand that,
Well,
but
no, my broader point is that this is not how proteins are constructed. They are not constructed one amino acid at a time. Like,
I recognize that's not what I'm arguing. You have to see what I'm arguing. All right, let's just simplify it. You have a protein of 2 amino acids, and it has to be the 2. Like I don't know the names of the amino acids anymore, but let's just say that in the first spot of the 2, it has to be one of the 20. There's only one possibility to make this protein function.
sure, okay.
So you have a 1 in 20 chance in that first spot of being correct. The second spot, it also has to be perfect. It has to be the right one. So that's also 1 out of 20.
But you say that you're not
Hold on, let me
calculating the
finish. So I'm
probabilities
in
for
this
a scenario in which the amino acids are randomly coming together to build
I'm
something.
not
But that's
trying
what
to
you're
create.
calculating.
I'm just giving you the theory the mathematics behind the probabilities.
But we've
That's not the
already made
mathematics
so
behind the
many faulty
probabilities.
assumptions about
I
protein
know.
formation that are
I'm
not
just
true.
creating a very simple, non-realistic, hypothetical scenario that has nothing to do with reality. I
Okay,
admit
okay.
that.
As long as you put that disclaimer that it's not realistic, I'm with you.
Okay, all right. So basically, if you have a protein 2 amino acids in length? What is the probability if you just randomly select amino acids from a giant pool of amino acids and put in 1
1 in
2?
400.
It's 1 in 400, correct? So when you start getting to a normal length of a protein, which is like 100 and sometimes more, thousands in length, those numbers are astronomical after so long. So you can see how, if we assume that the sequences are very specific, which they many times are, how hard it would be to for an evolutionary process to search the sequence space to find the proper sequences. And this is the problem I'm seeing with evolution in terms of
I thought you
mathematics.
said you
No,
were
if
taking
you're
selection
doing an
into account.
unrealistic, you just admitted it was an unrealistic model that you were using. Why would we pay attention to the probability and say, "Oh, that's against evolution"?
Because
when
it
you
does.
just
It does.
said-
That scenario, that exact specific example was unrealistic. But when you do start getting into the real world application, the numbers actually do still seem to be very bad, because one
Okay,
problem
A's,
is
what is the
ridiculous.
probability that you formed in your mom's womb, right? If we take every atom in your body and calculate what are the odds of each of them coming together in the exact sequence to make baby you in your mom's womb, we would conclude it's mathematically impossible for you to have been born. Like, that's why if you calculate probabilities for an unrealistic scenario, right? That's not how birth works. You're not ordered atom by atom. So calculating the probability of you coming together atom by atom is a total non sequitur. It doesn't make any sense to calculate that probability and to try to ascribe it to the real world scenario of how you were born.
So that's why I want to point out that the papers that I'm seeing are calculating different probabilities than U.R.As. It's because they're using an accurate model, and you're using a highly inaccurate model and think you've got some kind of gotcha because you've got this incredibly inaccurate model. You're projecting that. And I mean, I realize that you're saying, hey, but still in the real world, it would be hard. You're projecting your highly inaccurate model to the real world and then expecting it to be evidence against evolution. I'm really sorry, mate, but if you're going to use an inaccurate model, you're going to get inaccurate results, even when you project it to the real world.
Yeah. So all right. So the chemistry, underlying genomic. Well, the problem with the problem Titan Uranus, great name, is that when these mutations are occurring in the DNA, there's nothing that specifies which nucleotide will go in which point. So the mutations are random. The sequences that they will generate during the mutations are random. It's not like the structure helps in any significant way.
Not really. I mean, for mathematical models, we can say mutations are random, but in reality, certain mutations are more likely than others, both in location, there's hot and cold spots of the genomes, and in the specific type of mutations, like an A to a G or an A to a T. Like, the probabilities for these things are not equal. Like, it's slightly nitpicky, but they are not true random.
So, how important is the geometric shape on that, Grayson? I just to clarify what Titan was saying there about geometry, the geometry of the.
Yeah, the geometric shape is immensely important for pretty much all enzymatic activity. The actual shape of both the
Mhm.
active site
Well,
and the enzyme as a whole is extremely important for how it's going to be like sent to where it needs to go, how it's going to interact with its ligands. Like the shape is the key. So as long as, and these shapes are fairly robust, they can take a large amount of mutation and still have the overall same shape as long
Yeah, that's
as
what I
like there are
mean.
certain key amino acids in the sequence of the protein that are key to that shape, like certain lynch points, And as long as you have that basic skeleton, like the rest of the amino acid identities don't really matter that much as long as they're not interfering with the overall shape.
I don't think that's correct. That's not what I understand. And again, I'm not an expert, but from what I understand, you can't just you can't. There may be instances of it. I won't deny that. I don't have
It
an
is not
exhaustive knowledge
likely.
of this, but from my understanding, many proteins, or maybe even most, can't really sustain that many point mutations before their function totally degrades. So that's probably an area where we're going to disagree, and that would be an area to question and find answers that I would like to,
Well,
you know.
the funny thing is, I mean, I'm reading the same thing that Grayson is saying on these papers that I've pulled up. That the more highly expressed a protein is, the slower it evolves because of the both strength and universality of this effect. It requires an explanation that applies in any organism, is consistent with protein biophysics, and is capable of reproducing the key patterns of sequence variation observed in natural proteins. So I'm reading the same thing he is saying from a paper on this paper is biophysical models of protein evolution, understanding the patterns of evolutionary sequence divergence.
Well,
Julian
and
Avash
listen,
and
I don't
Paul
I don't want to.
Zerabelki. Well, I just want to say one thing really quick.
Okay.
So, the papers and Grayson and everybody is sort of saying that what you're saying isn't true. And you're sort of leaning on this stuff you've read in books published by anti-evolution people. And I don't know why we should sort of believe that when you've sort of misrepresented, not maybe not intentionally, but misrepresented how these proteins come together and how it actually occurs. So why would we believe you over the documented papers, the experts that have written them, and things like that?
Yeah, and I don't want to pull credentials here, but I do just want to point out, I mean, like I don't think I've said this on my channel before, but I did used to work in a structural biochemistry lab where the whole what we did in the lab was we took out like parts of proteins and substituted them with different parts and observed how that affected their structure and how that impacted their function. So literally, I have done the experiments on this exact subject. So I'm not
Nice.
at a PhD level of expertise here, but I do know a little bit of something about what I'm talking about.
Okay, well, I guess what I would have to do is do more research on how many mutations, specifically point mutations, a DNA sequence can sustain before its protein loses function. I know that you are correct when you say that it can be a significant amount, but I also do believe, like um like I'm reading. Okay, this is Wikipedia. I don't really like Wikipedia all that much, but like if you go to the article on point mutation, it says most proteins can withstand one or two point mutations before their function changes. So function
But
changes
that's
does not
functional
mean,
change.
yeah, that does
Doesn't
not
mean
mean
collapse.
ceases functioning, but we can see
Right.
most proteins are between like 100 and 1,000 amino acids long. With one or two, you're already getting a change of function.
Well, they
And
just what you just
But
read
that's
said
not a
that most
collapse.
don't have a change of function with one or two.
uh,
Like, did I miss
it's
the part where it
it's
said
okay.
after
This
three or
is what I'm
four they
reading.
start having a
It
bad
says
impact, or
this is
what?
what it says. The article is called Point Mutation, and where it says is most proteins can withstand one or two point mutations before their function changes. Um, and then it goes on to say two sentences later, the protein may lose its function. So again, this is Wikipedia. I'm not sure what this source is, where it's citing that, but so take it for what it is. But
No, Wikipedia should have a source.
yeah,
There should be a source on there.
Again, this is an area of study that would be interesting. The last I checked, there are proteins. I'm quite certain about this. There are proteins that even a couple point mutations destroys their function. So those do exist. I think
sure,
I'm safe
yes,
in saying
some
that.
Yeah,
some of them do
every
exist.
protein is like that. It just
I
depends
have
on where
worked
the
my
point
butt
mutation
off to
occurs.
make Wikipedia something that's viable, so it's not 2006 anymore. We should have all citations on there. Just throw that out there.
Yeah, big
Okay.
fan of Wikipedia. Everyone should donate to Wikipedia. Big ups to them. But I'm just saying, it depends on where
They're
the point
biased.
mutation occurs, right? If you have a point mutation in the active site of a protein, of course, you only need one point mutation to impact its function. But the majority of an enzyme is not that functional to its
Well, here's the
role.
problem. The reason one or two point mutations can make a huge difference is because it completely shifts the frame of reference for the rest of the protein, and the proteins have to fold in a specific way.
That's a frame
Not
shift
necessarily.
mutation, not a point mutation.
Yeah.
Well, a point mutation can create a disturbance in
Yeah, but
in
you're
how
talking
the
about
entire thing.
specifically changing one amino acid out for another amino acid. So you're already
Out
talking
of
about
hundreds, like you
downstream
said.
from translation.
All right. Yeah. Okay. That's correct. I'm trying to do research on the fly here, and it seems to me that there's a wide variety of types of proteins. Some of them are very specific, and some of them can tolerate a larger number of mutations.
Yeah, it's true. I don't need to gang up on you or whatever. I mean, I know that you're the only one versus four others on the other side. I mean, some of your creationist friends need to hop in here and help you out, maybe. But
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there are any more out there. But
it also mentions in this Wikipedia article that evolution is sort of the causes of evolution and point mutations in evolution. So why is it that you're taking sort of why is it that it's believable on one or 2 point mutations causing a change in function, but it's not believable on evolution? Why is that?
Because if you think about how the process would have had to unfold in history, you would have had to go to a point where certain proteins don't exist to existing. And really, there's only one way this could have happened, which is through some sort of mutation selection mechanism. And you would have had to go from these protein families, these fold classes not existing at all, to them existing. And sometimes you only have one.
Abiogenesis?
No, it's not abiogenesis. So,
no, I mean, he's talking about the creation of new genes by mutation. But I think what you're failing to account for is that these are mutations of pre-existing genes and proteins.
No, well, sometimes they're not, because there are almost every single organism on Earth has proteins that are specific to its own type.
And those derive from pre-existing.
That's not
proteins.
True.
They don't just come out of nowhere.
I forget what they're called. No. They're called. Actually, there are.
You're talking about orphan genes.
Right, there are orphan genes.
Yeah, and orphan genes don't just come out of nowhere. Like, they don't just come from nothing.
Some of them do. That's the problem.
No, they result from mutations of pre-existing genes.
I'm really confused. Weren't you the one arguing that no new proteins have formed, and we sort of pointed out a few examples of them?
Well, we can't assume that these orphan genes evolved. That's the whole problem. Is you have these incredibly complex biomolecules which just are apparently there, and how did they get there? Could they have happened by some sort of just de novo mutation event? And the answer is probably not. No.
Even though we've shown examples of that exact thing happening.
Yeah, and I guess that doesn't answer my question of how you can tell one part of Wikipedia is correct and the other not. If you're using as a citation, you're using that as sort of, this is demonstrating the truth of what I'm saying. But I'll pass that up. So if it did not happen by mutation, as the papers and all of the information we've given sort of says, how did it happen?
Well, it would have had to have happened by some sort of intelligent design, in my opinion. I don't see any other way.
Okay. And so what evidence do you have like we're presenting all of this evidence that, hey, this probability isn't the same as what you're saying. There are other factors involved. There is a structure that sort of predisposes these proteins to forming the geometric structure. So what do you have for us that shows that a God created these things?
Well, honestly, I recognize that there are instances where these things can be demonstrated, but when you start looking at everything that's out there, there are a lot of things that can't be explained by evolutionary mechanisms. So it's like, how did this happen?
Like what?
It couldn't have happened? I can't think of any naturalistic mechanism by which it could have happened, but like
Is there an
intelligence.
example?
Yeah, these. I'm still talking about proteins and DNA sequences.
I
It's
guess
possible.
even if it were the case that it wasn't done by evolution, that doesn't get you one step closer to a God.
I
Like
also
you
just have
have
to
to have
ask.
It
evidence
invalidates the if you
for
can.
a God. No, let me finish. It doesn't. You need evidence for a God, not against any other theory out there. Like you need to demonstrate that a God in fact did that, or else, if you're going to be intellectually consistent, you could argue that, hey, it could have been magic, it could have been aliens, it could have been any number of things. But you've decided on a God, but you don't seem to have any evidence for a God. You seem to want to just say, hey, I have evidence against the scientific consensus.
Well, I don't believe I ever used the word God. I do believe I used the word intelligence. So an intelligent designer. So that there are intelligent design proponents who are atheists and who believe it maybe have been atheists. I
So
can't
I
think of
just
their
have to ask then, you believe that Nilanase was already existing within, like this was designed by this intelligent designer and already existing within the genomes of these bacteria. So my question is, how intelligent would it be to create a gene for decomposing nylon, but not create genes for decomposing, I don't know, plastic or, a bunch of other problematic chemicals that we've leaked into the environment? Like if the designer had the foresight to create Nilanase to handle nylon litter, why is it that we only find Nilanase among a very small population of bacteria that are showing a gene that's different than the rest of their species? Like the rest of the species doesn't have that gene. So why wouldn't all the genes have it, or all the bacteria have it? And then why don't we see, oil spills or plastics or other kinds of litter and pollutants? Why don't we find that this designer had created a solution to where we're not polluting the planet that they designed?
Well, I'm actually willing to accept that Nilanase occurred entirely naturally in the recent history by, a genetic mutation event, because these things are possible. They are within the realm of possibility.
But
Um,
your whole argument is that it's not. You said that if you
Right.
count up all the mutations that have ever happened in the entire history of the Earth, that you don't have enough mutations to account for even one beneficial gene.
well,
So if you're acknowledging that in Nilanase, it seems like you've refuted your first claim.
well, we have to look at every specific case. Do I think Nilanase could have just formed de novo from a completely neutral sequence to a functional sequence? No, but what you described of a frame shift and a couple point mutations, that seems incredibly likely to me and could have very well have happened within life's history. I have no problem believing that. Just like I have no problem believing that fish lost their eyes over the course of a million years when they got stuck in caves. Like these things do happen, but
Well,
that's a lot. That's a lot different than saying like a fish evolved from like a prehistoric clam or whatever. It's a
well,
difference in
one's
scale.
the problem here is the time element, because you're saying, okay, a point mutations and a couple of a frame shift mutation, a couple of point mutations produced Nilanase. That you can believe that, but the problem is that nylon was only invented in 1930s, and its structure of Nilanase is totally different than anything we've seen before. It's totally different than what it evolved from. So when you go, oh, well, that's the product of, less than 100 years, 90 years or so, you then take into account the 4 billion years that you were saying earlier, and suddenly your probability thing does not look so unlikely. If myelinase can be developed or evolve over 90 years, what can evolve over 4 billion years?
Right, and I do think that gets down to the specific case of myelinase. Again, I'm not an expert on this, but if it is
Sounds
the
like
case,
special pleading to me.
well, here's the thing: if it is the case that myelinase is the result of a few simple mutation events that did result in a new class, but nevertheless did form from pre-existing functional sequences, which underwent a couple, mutation events, a frame shift, and a couple point mutation. That is very likely to have happened because of how many organisms there are. These bacteria, their numbers. I can see how that a mutation like that would happen, but when you start trying to explain more significant accumulation of genetic material, even in 4 billion years, it's the again, it's not impossible. It's just almost unlikely to the point of impossibility or improbability.
You've already admitted that the scenario for which you're using to construct these probabilities is not realistic. And you've already admitted that we've seen examples potentially of new genes arising from mutation. So honestly, I think maybe I'll let you, get a final word in or whatever. But I did want to switch the topic here because Rational Empiricist was interested in discussing Big Bang Cosmology coming up for my next debate. So I did want to allow a little bit of time on that and not just, have him sit here for multiple hours before we got to it.
Do you think you wanted to discuss it?
Well, thank you for having me on. I just wrap up in a minute or two here. If anyone is actually willing to see a more thorough examination of this, I recommend looking at Stephen Meyer's book Darwin's Doubt, or there's a 20-minute YouTube video put out by the Discovery Institute called The Information Enigma, and it explains it a lot better than I ever could. And I also have a channel, A's Philosophy. I talk a lot about Christianity, which I'm not sure would interest anyone here, but I do believe Christianity has been corrupted. What is currently presented as Christianity is not what was originally taught. So if anyone's interested in converting to Christianity at some point, just realize that the modern offers are not exactly what was originally taught by Christ himself. So hope you'll all be willing to look into that, but otherwise you all have a good whatever it is for you, evening, morning, night, or whatever.
Thanks, A's, and I do appreciate you coming on, and you're the bravest creationist of the night, so I appreciate you for coming on and having the discussion.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes.
All right. Yep. Thank you all. Bye.
Sweet. So, for those of you that missed it earlier, I'm going to be having a debate on Big Bang Cosmology coming up on Modern Day Debates. So, Rational Empiricist wanted to use his previous experience with debating my debate opponent on the same topic to kind of offer up a few pointers. So, I'm definitely open to hearing from him. So, I'll open up the floor.
Yeah. So, and anyone else can chime in if they have questions or if they just want to discuss some of this. I'm by no means.
I don't know, Mark and Breed. You guys do debates on the Big Bang?
Cool.
I have, yeah.
I'll debate anything. You should know that by now.
Yeah, fair.
I think one of my first debates was on the Big Bang with Otangelo Grasso of all people.
Oh, really?
So,
I didn't know that.
I haven't seen him around for a while, actually. I wonder if
No,
he's okay.
he won't come around me
He
anymore
pops
anyway.
his head in every
He
once in a
told
while.
me that he would do a debate on abiogenesis, and he was telling Donnie that he wanted to do it on SFT's channel, but then I wanted to do it on my channel, and I've had heard radio silence ever since I suggested it.
Why should Donnie get all the super chats?
Yeah.
Actually, you're not monetized yet, are you? No, not quite yet.
Oh,
252 though, you're getting up there.
yeah,
That's great. I've had a few new
pretty good,
subscribers
Jason.
just since this stream began, so I very much appreciate all you guys, and also the fact that there are currently more likes on this live stream than there are viewers, or the same amount, or no, there are more likes than viewers. So I really definitely appreciate that. I don't know, I've never seen that before, so I very much appreciate all the support.
Yeah,
but
thanks
do
all
subscribe.
for
Like, what
watching.
can it hurt? Just a button. Just hit it, and
Feed the
you'll never look back. feed.
You just
so,
listen anyway.
Okay, so
come on.
Big Bang. So the
Yeah.
two major evidences for Big Bang are,
or well, there's more than two, but yeah. So
well, the two major
You're
ones.
implying the redshift and the cosmic microwave background.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, they're the big ones. Yeah.
Yeah, those are two of the big ones. Yeah. Yeah. So Sal, he has a slew of arguments he typically brings up, or at least he's brought up a number of times with me when, like, we haven't done a debate per se, but we have discussed some of these topics on a few occasions. So I think I'm relatively familiar with, because he does say this similar things on multiple occasions. And I think Rebecca seems like bases her arguments off of his, or that he's kind of feeding her what she's saying, not to degrade her in any way, of course, but I do think that's what's happening, is she's listening to him and him alone on this subject. But
So let me lay out what my expectations are, right?
Sure.
Because,
Yeah. Let's start there.
So basically, since it's a tag team with Leo Filius, I'm letting Leo take the reins because I've seen him summarize the evidences for the Big Bang before, and I think he does an excellent job. So with my opening, what I wanted to do was specifically address some of the counterpoints that maybe my opponents would bring up. So far, I wanted to talk about, how can you fit all of the matter in the universe in a very small space? So I was going to talk about, quark gluon plasma and things that we've actually observed. And then I was going to talk about tired light. I don't know if they're going to bring up tired light, but you definitely have more experience with Sal's arguments than I do. And then I was going to bring up I've seen Sal. The only time I've seen Sal make a video on the Big Bang was about the periodization of redshift and how it's not continuous. So I was prepping to address that argument.
When
I
was
think
that
I've heard,
if I may ask, about like quantized redshift or what you were saying? Do you know when he published that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I believe it was last year, and he was citing an article about 4 Indian scientists that were talking about the periodization of like the quantized redshift that they were supposedly observing. So that's the only time I've ever seen him bring up the Big Bang in a video. So that's why I wanted to specifically address that.
And would you be comfortable, just curious, giving how you were going to respond to that particular argument?
So basically, there have been supposed observations of the periodization of redshift since like the 70s. And typically the problems, at least according to, I found a review article from 2022, so last year, about the history and the data behind like the redshift periodicity. And their basic conclusion was that the data sizes that were used to make these observations were not sufficient, or they were heterogeneously chosen. And that when you have a larger data set, the significance begins to decline. When we look at, more than just one cluster of galaxies, or we look at, when we include a sample size of all observed galaxies, we no longer see this effect.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was hoping you were going to say. Yeah, I think that's the main point you can drive home if he brings up that particular argument. Because with larger galaxy surveys, we found the redshift periodization becomes less significant, like you said. I apologize, by the way, for my stuttering. It is getting kind of late over here, so I may mess up my words here and there. But
relax. It's no problem at all.
Yeah, hey man, if Joe Biden can get elected president, then you can absolutely kill it in this live stream.
Oh, thanks. Were you gonna say another argument or counter argument you were going to mention earlier?
To bring up an argument, because I got to go soon, but I want to bring up an argument, which is that, and I've heard a couple of people say it. I don't know if Sal and Rebecca are going to use it, but it's sort of, we thought galaxies were older, and then we found they were they formed earlier.
That's exactly what I was going to bring up.
Really?
They are launching all this JWST data and saying, But the galaxy formation is way too sophisticated than we would expect. And basically, my argument against that is like galaxy formation is not part of the Big Bang theory. Like
Right.
it's not really. It doesn't have anything to do. It doesn't change any of our observations about cosmic microwave background. Like, yeah, we don't have all of the answers and the dynamics involved in galaxy formation, but that again is not part of the Big Bang theory. Really, I
Yeah,
mean,
there are multiple ways to come at it. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good approach because on the first layer, galaxy formation, for one, is still relatively poorly understood. That's why we launched JWST in the sky to begin with, for one reason.
Yeah.
But
I'll see you
also,
guys in the side chat.
oh, see you, Bree.
all right. Good. Thanks for
Perfect.
for coming on, Bree. It was great having you as always.
Beautiful, Bree. Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry, go ahead, Rational.
Yeah, so the galaxy formation models, for one, aren't even part of lambda CDM or aren't specifically tied to it per se. And by lambda CDM, I just mean cold, dark matter, dark energy models of cosmology. And like you were saying, those models, lambda CDM, is kind of just the simplest type of that kind of cosmology, if you want to think of it that way. It's involves the Big Bang, but it isn't the Big Bang theory per se. There are models that can incorporate the Big Bang that also involve dark energy and dark matter. They're just a little more complex than lambda CDM by itself. So at most, we could say that these JWST results, and this is assuming that the redshift observations, that their distances do turn out to be that far away. It hasn't been confirmed for all of them. In fact, it hasn't been confirmed for most of them at this point. Um, but if we grant that, then at most we can say, oh yeah, LCDM has to be tweaked a little bit, but that by no means, like you were saying, Grayson, touches the core of the Big Bang as an idea.
Doesn't invalidate.
Yeah, because it doesn't at
Well-
all change the fact that we have the cosmic microwave background. So like we
Right,
can look up and know
yeah.
at one point there were no stars. Like we can see it in the cosmic microwave background. So it doesn't change any of the evidence for the Big Bang.
Well, it's also because of redshift. Like at a certain point, redshift goes into the infrared, like because it's shifting towards red. The James Webb is able to see into the infrared spectrum, which is why it's so amazing, right? That this is why the James Webb telescope is incredible. The Hubble didn't have that capability. So we put the Hubble out there, we couldn't actually see the redshift that made it over a certain level where it became the infrared spectrum.
Right.
But the James Webb can. So it can see these galaxies that we could never see before. So that is why the James Webb is amazing. And just for the chat, yeah, it's fantastic in Australia. Every day is a good day in Australia. Joe Rogan recently went on a podcast and said that Perth is gorgeous. Where I live, he's not wrong. I feel so proud, but yeah. It's gorgeous over here. Thanks.
Yeah, so on
I'll be the first one to admit that early galaxy formation is a big unknown in astronomy currently, but it's also like it's not within the early formation of the universe, which is the Big Bang. Right. So it's like
an exciting topic to be sure. Yeah.
And if they try to say that it's like, oh well, like you have to have the formation of galaxies if the Big Bang is true, like sure, like you also have to, that doesn't mean that you have to explain every single thing in the world around us today, and that's part of the Big Bang. You know, for like an apple for a Carl Sagan reference, you know, an apple pie recipe is not part of the Big Bang, even though if the Big Bang is true, there has to be a naturalistic explanation for how a apple pie recipe came to being. That doesn't mean it's part of the Big Bang.
Yeah, I just say that like. Sorry, go ahead.
I think just to watch for the argument from incredulity, like how could this possibly have happened kind of thing. Just that argument from incredulity. Just it's a logical fallacy for a reason. Just because you're incredulous of it happening doesn't mean it didn't happen.
So that's what I was going to address, because I saw Leo Phileas's video with Rebecca where they had like a 2-hour conversation on this.
Oh yeah.
And my main takeaway
Mm.
was that an argument from incredulity was her main argument. And
Yes,
she
yes,
could not
100%.
understand how you could get all the matter in the universe into such a small amount of space. That's what she was incredulous about. So that's why I wanted to preempt that, but with a discussion of quark gluon plasma, and saying
Yeah.
that this was first predicted, right, in like the 70s and 80s. And it was predicted that if you bring in matter into a very, very small confined space, like, then the actual quarks will break confinement in protons, and you get a state of matter called quark gluon plasma at certain high densities. And then we predicted that, and in the year 2000 we found experimental evidence that it does exist, and now we've had 20 years of measuring its properties. And so we know that in the very early universe, where you had all the matter in a confined space, this is not like a period on the size of a page or whatever. This is during the quark epoch, but we know that you could fit it all into the area of the universe that was the size of the universe in the quark epoch. Like, we have the math, we have the experimental evidence to support this. Quark gluon plasma exists, and it answers this question.
Okay,
Yeah,
well, make sure you
think
dumb it
you're-
down so like a creationist or me can understand it, Grace.
Yeah, I'll have to work on my delivery, but since it'll be a part of my opening, I'll have it like written out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of pictures and slide slow presentations. I am. I use them every single time. So consider doing that if you want to. But
yeah, it's just like, I guess I would say, like, okay, so she wants to bring up like a purse or a carton of milk or an everyday object.
Right.
So I'll say, look,
Right.
if you take that object and you continue to compress it more and more and more, and you put more energy into compressing it, eventually what you're going to make is a plasma, right? You're going to break down you're going to break down the atoms to where, like, they're no longer capable of forming like stable molecules. They're going to lose their electrons. It's going to form a dense plasma. And if you keep going even beyond that, you're going to condense it down so much that the actual atom nuclei themselves break down, and you're going to have free protons and neutrons. And when you continue to compress it, even the protons and neutrons are going to break apart and break confinement. And all you're going to have is like a liquid soup of quarks and gluons. And this is like the most condensed form of matter that we currently know exists from experiments. Like, we have produced quark gluon plasma, we know its properties, and we know that you can condense matter down to a very, very small space when it's in the form of quark gluon plasma.
Is that quantum foam?
No.
Okay.
Oh, we produce quark gluon plasma in particle accelerators. Like, when we slam two particles at super high energies, they actually, for a split second, they create quark gluon plasma because the energy density becomes so high that confinement is broken and the actual protons themselves break down. So we've actually measured the properties, and we've seen that actually, it's interesting. The properties are almost like a liquid. So this stuff kind of behaves like an ocean of gluons with a few quarks floating around in it. But we know the properties of this. We have verified by experiment that it does exist. It was predicted by our current scientific models decades before it was found. So I think it's a very strong explanation for, like, to address the incredulity of saying, we can condense
novel testable predictions.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
All
right.
So
well, I got to
that was
take
the
off.
angle
I'm
that
so
I was
sorry,
going on,
Grayson,
Rebecca.
but I got to go. But thank you so much for having me on. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. Rational, it was a pleasure to speak to you as well, mate. Do you have a channel or something?
No, unfortunately not. But I do hang out on Answers in Atheism and other channels sometimes.
Oh, Speed of Sounds. Yeah, okay.
Speed of Sounds,
It's just the time difference trips me up. Speed of Sounds. I wanted to go on his channel so often, but it's just the time that we can't seem to mesh up. And he's a great guy. I like Speed. Yeah, it is. But it's so good to hang out with you guys, and thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks,
have a good day or night or wherever you are. See you guys.
See you.
All right. Well, it's always great to have Mark Reed on. Everyone should go subscribe to his channel. There's some responses in the side chat I just wanted to address. The Titan said that it wasn't a small amount of space, there was no space. So what I want to clarify here is that I was not talking about a singularity. I was talking about the universe during the quark epoch, which comes after inflation. So the universe already has some sizable amount of space at this time when it's full of quark gluon plasma. Like, we really cannot talk about much before that because, the physics of the inflaton field are hypothetical, even though there's some empirical evidence to support it in the cosmic microwave background. But beyond that, like, when you continue to compress beyond the quark gluon plasma, you're going to start to get very strange effects as the fundamental forces combine, like in the electroweak force, and then the electronuclear force, and you're going to start to come up against types of physics that we don't have the mathematical models at present to really describe that well about what the actual material of the universe would have been made of at that time.
Yeah, because when you bring up the quark gluon plasma, Rebecca or maybe Sal are certainly gonna go back to what you were saying. Do you think this purse was once part of a singularity? That kind of question. But I think, yeah, you should really harp on the fact that going past a certain point, the quark gluon plasma is the best understood of these conditions as far as the early universe goes, or nearabouts, and that, yeah, this does show that the universe was once very, very, very hot and dense, not necessarily a singularity, but it was in that state at one time.
Yeah, one final argument that I was going to preempt that I come up
Yeah.
against every time that I do a debate on the Big Bang, and I've brought it up in just about every debate I've done on the Big Bang, but like, the singularity itself is not a part of the Big Bang model. It's not part
No,
of,
it
like, the
isn't.
math. Like, see, let me know if you take umbrage with any of the words that I'm using to describe
Yeah,
this, but
yeah.
I will say that the singularity is a mathematical construction. It's a mathematical artifact of the fact that we don't have the physics to describe what's going on there because we don't have a quantum theory of gravity. Like, literally, our physics and math is not sophisticated enough to describe what was going on at the point of time. So the singularity doesn't make any rational sense to be like an actual physical object that existed. It's a result of the fact that our mathematics is literally breaking down.
Yeah, I think a maybe more precise way of wording it would be that the Big Bang singularity specifically, or just singularities in general, emerge from what happens, like you said, mathematically when we take general relativity, which is our modern theory of gravity. And I know you already know this, of course, but I'm just giving it out to the audience. That when we take general relativity into these extreme conditions, you ultimately, yeah, get up with a singularity. But the fact remains that general relativity is not a quantized description of reality. It doesn't jive well with quantum mechanics. And so in that respect, we know, or are fairly confident that it is an incomplete theory. So while it works in other cases, in terms of our description of gravity, in terms of the Big Bang itself, it isn't necessarily reliable in terms of these conditions where we know quantum mechanics plays a role with the singularity.
Yeah,
So yeah,
exactly. So
yeah,
that's kind of the approach that I generally take whenever creationists will ask me about questions about the singularity, or they'll ask what came before the singularity, or blah 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 blah. I say, literally, there is no currently accepted mathematical theory that is even capable of describing that, like, in any kind of empirical
right,
sense.
yeah.
So it's literally not something that we can weigh in on. It's not part of the theory. It's not part of the mathematical models or description of the Big Bang or the Lambda CDM model.
Because when people hear the term Big Bang, they think of the Big Bang singularity, but what they really should be thinking of is the Big Bang state, per se. That the universe was once this sea of hot, dense energy, basically. And that's what the Big Bang at its core really says, that the universe started in that early state and has emerged from that and evolved into its present state. It doesn't really say anything about an actual singularity per se. It says, oh yeah, this may be there, but that's not really the the main idea behind that.
Yeah, it's like a missing piece of the puzzle, right? It's not
Yeah.
a part of the actual puzzle. There's no piece there, like mathematically, physically, like
Yeah.
we don't know what the piece looks like.
I like how one astronomer put it. It's basically the point where we say, "Here be dragons." It's not really a thing that actually exists. It's just a part where we, at some point, are going to push it back farther, but we haven't pushed it back that far yet. Like, who knows how far we're going to push it back necessarily?
Yeah. So I was mostly expecting for them to bring up JWST data about early
Right.
galaxy formation.
Yeah.
And then
Oh,
I
yeah,
was
for sure.
expecting the incredulity about like the physical possibility of being able to condense matter that small. And then some weird questions about the singularity. That's basically what I was expecting. I don't know if he's even going to bring up the periodization of redshift, but yeah.
Yeah, I doubt that specifically. He hasn't really brought it up recently, but one thing about Redshift that I do think he may actually bring up is this thing he's really been harping on recently about plasma redshift. I don't know if you've heard of that, but basically what as I understand it, they've taken radio emissions from the solar corona, I believe, and they found that yes, these do appear to be redshifted. Um, so what he's going to try and or what he'll probably try and do is say what he said to me, for example, that we can see redshift occur in these plasma electron filled environments, basically. Therefore, perhaps cosmological redshift is in fact not caused by the expansion of space. Maybe it's caused by some other mechanism. Like you said, uh, not exactly tired light per se, but kind of related to that. Um, and basically, my response to that, and maybe you can use this in your debate as well, would be okay, you showed that radio emissions, for example, could be redshifted. For one thing, we already know redshift can be caused by mechanisms other than the expansion of space, gravity or gravitational redshift, for example, the Doppler redshift that everyone's more familiar with. Um, it's not like all redshift is caused by expansion. But another thing is they showed this for a specific wavelength of light, radio waves, I believe, but they didn't necessarily show it for all wavelengths of light. And what we see when we look out into space is that all wavelengths of light are uniformly redshifted. There's no difference between how UV light from a star is redshifted versus infrared or uh, or radio waves. So why do we see that here, but it hasn't necessarily been shown with how matter interacts with light, which is what tired light needs, or what this plasma redshift idea uh, proposes. I hope that makes a little more sense. But yeah, if he does bring that up, then that's how I would respond.
Yeah, I'll have to read more about plasma redshift and then I'll
Yeah,
re-listen to this. But what
yeah, it's kind
immediately
of
comes to
a
mind,
more fringe idea, to be honest. But
yeah, so what immediately comes to mind when I hear that is there time dilation involved in that plasma
yeah.
redshift? Because there is?
Oh no, there isn't. All right, I don't think they measured it, but yeah,
Oh, yeah,
I
because I
was
was
just
gonna say,
saying
like,
yes because when you bring that up, he's going to talk about the time dilation probably, and he has um, some papers he brings up. The math is kind of complicated behind it, as you probably know, but he brings up some papers by Crawford et al. 2017, and uh, talks about how supposedly we haven't found. Um, uh, time dilation in supernova light curves or quasars, and we can go by each of those piece by piece. Sorry, what what were you gonna say before I interrupted you?
Yeah, like if we don't see time dilation in like these plasma redshifts that you're talking about, then it's probably pretty clear that it's not the same mechanism that is causing the redshift than what
Okay,
we're seeing in the rest of the universe where we do see time dilation.
yeah, yeah. So when you bring up time dilation, I guess starting with quasars, for example. He's going to bring up a study by Hawkins et al. From 2010, I believe. And what I did, this actually got me in a bit of trouble with him recently. But I brought up this paper that showed, okay, what Hawkins did was basically look for the signature of time dilation in the quasar light curves. How, but we know that quasar light curves are fairly complex, like say compared to a star, for example, or a supernova. It's a lot more. I mean, because it's just a bunch of matter falling into a black hole, basically an accretion disk. That's not the same thing as a star exploding in a neat, orderly way. Neat and orderly in that sense. So the quasar light curves are fairly complex. So it's not like you can just measure time dilation off of it in a really simple, easy way. And that's why we've had to use indirect means to see if, okay, maybe time dilation is there. But what Hawkins did was essentially they didn't find any evidence of time dilation. They found that they couldn't detect it. What they interpreted that as, and what other researchers have rightly claimed they misinterpreted from that, is that therefore there is no time dilation in quasars. So they didn't detect it, but as you know, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So there have been papers since then that I've pointed out to him, and I can give you if you want, that have used other independent methods and have found that the time dilation, okay, you can't rule it out for these quasars. You can't measure it directly, like I was saying. It's not that easy, but you can't rule it out either. So the initial claim that time dilation in quasars, for example, doesn't exist is kind of it's a little premature, if that makes sense. I hope I'm making sense there. But yeah, that's if he brings up time dilation in quasars from Hawkins et al. or them, then that's probably the way to respond to that.
Okay, definitely send me over some of the literature on that, because I'm not familiar
Sure.
with this
Yeah.
Hawkins
Yeah.
paper or the responses to it. So I'll need to familiarize myself for sure.
Yeah. The other thing he'll bring up is and I can send you some of the stuff on this too. Is this paper by David Crawford, who is an actual astronomer. He basically really contrived analysis of some of these supernovae light curves. He took this light curve fitting program and searched for time dilation that way, ignoring the fact that other such programs also exist that have found time dilation in the light curves. And as I pointed out to Sal one time, and you can not only see time dilation in the light curves, which is basically how the brightness of the supernova changes with time, basically. You can also see it in the actual spectra of the supernovae, and what Sal will probably say is, oh, Crawford addressed that in his paper. Well, what Crawford did was he mentioned that research. He said he had some problems with it, but he didn't really address the actual methodology of the paper per se. He actually says he didn't have a problem with their methodology or what they found, more what they what he thought they assumed, that as far as I can tell, they didn't actually assume in terms of the redshift. And like I said, I can send you more of the specifics related to this. But yeah, long story short, we have seen time dilation in supernovae. We have we haven't seen it in quasars, but we have seen signs that it is probably there, or that we can't rule out its existence. So I hope that makes sense. So he's
Yeah, it
definitely gonna have
definitely
a thing or
does.
two to say about time dilation. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I didn't know that I'd be stepping on such a huge can of worms if I mentioned time dilation around Sal.
Yeah, he's had a few conversations with me about it. Let's just say, because it is an important issue in terms of, okay, is redshift actually caused by expansion or is it caused by some other mechanism? So
Are these
rightly so,
conversations recorded anywhere?
I think probably somewhere on his channel, but also mainly in like the comment section of unrelated streams, I think.
Okay, gotcha.
It kind of dispersed far and wide, unfortunately.
Yeah, okay. Because I had looked for, like, I googled, Sal Cordova, the like Big Bang or cosmology, and I was not finding very many videos. So it's good to
Okay.
know that he has been discussing these topics before, and sort of to get an idea of what he
Did you
might
look
bring
at
up.
his channel evidence and reasons specifically?
Yeah. So I did a search there. The only video I saw was that one about the periodization of
Huh,
redshift.
that's interesting.
So yeah, I don't know. Maybe my search was not as thorough as it could have been.
Yeah,
I don't
because
know.
he's done a few things with Rebecca actually pretty recently, so I don't know why that's not showing
Oh
up.
wow.
That's weird.
Okay. Then I'll have to look again, but yeah, this was pretty good. Were there any other points that you think that we haven't discussed yet, or things that you want to really emphasize?
Um, I guess the one other thing that he might use as an argument that I can think of offhand, he might bring up some other stuff, but I guess we'll just have you'll have to deal with that in the moment because I can't think of anything else that he's really brought up to me specifically. Anyways, the other thing he's talked about is something called the Tolman surface brightness test, which is actually related to the or somewhat related to the JWST
Yeah, that's
early
that's one of
galaxies in
Eric
the sun.
Lerner's. That's one of Eric
Yeah,
Lerner's
Eric Lerner.
ideas, right?
Yeah, he really goes off on that. Um, because Sal, if he does bring up the Tolman surface brightness test, he'll almost certainly bring up a quote from Wikipedia, which says, "Oh, we haven't found," um, uh, or I think he'll bring up that Wikipedia article to explain it, but what he'll conveniently do, or what he's conveniently done in the past, is uh, not scroll down to the part where it actually talks about how the researchers they didn't find it as a slam dunk for lambda CDM cosmology or Big Bang expansion specifically. Like you have to take into account the fact that galaxies are not the same as everywhere. Like they of course evolve and change over time, so you can't assume they're a standard ruler to measure their surface brightness, if that makes sense. But when you do take
Yeah,
into
that's what I
account,
think is so
yeah,
strange about it, is because it kind of implicit in the assumptions of Lerner is that the types of galaxies that we're seeing in the JWST and the very distant galaxies, like the as close as we can get to the first generation galaxies, he kind of wants to assume that they're similar to the galaxies of today.
right,
And he's pointing
exactly,
out, oh,
yes,
look at all the spiral galaxies, that there's so much more than we thought. It's so much more like today. Oh, look at the surface brightness. It shows, like, compared to their relative sizes, that they're the same kind of galaxies we see today. But I mean, I think that we have plenty of evidence to suggest that these galaxies are definitely not the same kinds of galaxies that we have today. I mean,
right.
their chemical composition is exactly in line with what we would expect. I mean, we've also seen, what are those, like stage 3 stars or phase 3 stars? I need to
Um,
familiarize
I
myself.
don't know if we've seen them specifically, but we do have some circumstantial indications that they probably do exist, but we haven't imaged them specifically.
I had just
Not yet.
seen the headline like last week that JWST imaged some that seem like strong candidates for
Oh, really?
for
Okay.
like stage 3 stars, but this was like very, very recent.
Okay.
And I think that it was not quite at a statistical significance of, like 5
Yeah.
sigma
We're
or whatever. But
probably awaiting further confirmation would be my
exactly.
guess. Yeah.
Exactly. But like, I mean, we have seen like that
Yeah.
these are chemically like the compositions are not
Yeah.
modern, like, you know, generational galaxies.
More hydrogen, more helium, less of the other stuff if it's present.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Sunflower says, are we not humbled by the something from nothing problem? No, not at all. We had already discussed the
Yeah.
singularity and everything like that. Nobody is saying something came from nothing. I don't even think Lawrence Krauss is saying that. He's famous for saying that.
Yeah,
Like,
what Lorraine says, the terminology behind it is kind of confusing because they technically should be called like population 1 stars, but they're called population 3 stars because they were theorized last. So it's kind of backwards, but unfortunately that's the naming behind it. What was I gonna say? Yeah, going back to what Sal says, and like you were saying, when we do take into account, uh, and the Wikipedia article mentions this, and the researchers do too, when you take into account stellar evolution models and how we think galaxies uh, change in terms of when you take all these factors into account, it's not inconsistent with the expectations of an expansion model. And I think Sal has actually said this, that like something along the lines of at most it's uh, not fatal to the Big Bang, and yeah, something along that. But so I think he does acknowledge that this is not a significant issue. But yeah, if he does bring that up, then yeah, just harp on him the fact that yeah, we uh, uh, yeah, there's deeper factors involved than just, oh, the galaxies are all the same size, so they must have the same inherent surface brightness.
yeah, yeah, that's a good point. And you know, in the chat, we're seeing this whole something from nothing argument raise its head. So, no, to answer Sunflower, I don't think it's a problem to begin with. Because the Big Bang doesn't say something came from nothing. It's not
Yeah,
part of the model. Nobody's saying
yeah,
something came from nothing, not even Lawrence Krauss. He redefines nothing so that it includes quantum fluctuations of like vacuum energy. Like that's not nothing. Nobody's saying that something came from nothing. And here we
at
go
most
again.
you could sorry,
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah, here we go, another comment, because the redshift in a spectrum, the Big Bang from random, nothing happened. Nobody's saying that. It's a total straw man. I think, honestly, that Sal and Rebecca, well, maybe Rebecca might, but I don't think that Sal will actually bring up something from nothing because I
Yeah, I
think
don't
that
think
maybe he's a
so.
little bit more sophisticated in his
Yeah,
understanding of the Lambda CDM model.
it's funny because at one point he said something along the lines of what Mitchell just said, that or not exactly what Mitchell said, but he brought up what are called police speedometers, and how, oh, you can measure redshift of cars going past you, but obviously no one says that's due to expansion. And I was really confused by that at first because, like you said, he usually has pretty sophisticated arguments. So um, when I pushed him on that, about his phrasing, there on some other stream, he actually says, "Oh yeah, I do understand the Hubble distance redshift relationship, and that the it's more complicated than just, oh, they are redshifted, therefore they're moving away from us." Um, yeah, if he does bring that up, then yeah, just hold his feet to the fire there and say, "Don't." That's not a that's not the best phrasing to use there in terms of the redshift.
Yeah, Mitchell, I don't know if you've been listening at all, but I was pretty explicit that the singularity is not a physical object. It's a mathematical construction. Like that, there's no nobody's going to show you a singularity because like the majority of astronomers and physicists don't actually think that a singularity is a real physical object.
And I think that's not necessarily the same as therefore there was no beginning to the universe. Some do think there's a beginning, but some also think it might be eternal into the past, and it might be cyclical. But yeah, I don't think most astronomers would say the singularity is a real physical thing. And we've been making that point like the last half hour. So
Yeah, I think that we've definitely driven that point home.
yeah,
I'm going to tentatively add Sunflower to the stream. Does that
sure.
sound okay?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can probably go on for a little bit. My mind is kind of fading. So
Yeah,
sorry.
so hey, welcome Sunflower. So what we were
Hey, Sunflower.
What's up?
basically doing was I'm going to be having a Big Bang debate coming up on Modern Day Debates. So we were kind of just going over what kind of arguments we might expect to hear, what kind of, just sort of going through debate prep basically.
Okay, that's fair. That sounds good.
Yeah, so we were just kind of addressing what are some common arguments that we hear from creationists against the Big Bang.
By
Okay,
the
fair
way,
enough. I guess
if the
my
date
so
on that is confirmed, let me know, Grayson. Sorry.
Sorry, what was that?
all I was saying is that when I jumped in, I just saw Base 3 after show. So forgive me if I derailed the topic a little bit with my
No, we
kind of-
did have an after show before the conversation. We've been going for over 2 hours now. So the
Wow.
kind of the first half when most people were on, we talked about like the debate on like Kent Hovind's debate tonight. We talked on ERVs, we talked about the probabilities of evolution, like we covered a lot of ground. But I just wanted to at the end
Right.
go over some of this debate prep because it's going to be coming up on February 28th. So I just wanted to make sure that I'm prepared. It's my first time on Modern Day Debates, so I want to make sure I don't look like an idiot.
Oh, yeah, no,
date
good
has
luck.
been confirmed?
Yeah.
What did you say, Rational?
I said the date has been tentatively confirmed.
Yeah,
Or-
tentatively confirmed for February 28th.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, all I was saying is that I guess I jumped in and I didn't realize that it was mostly a Big Bang like discussion. So that's just my bad. Like I'm just like I thought it was I was just sort of making a more generic poke at the conversation, but
no, that's all right too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I
but
saw you bringing up something from nothing in the chat.
Right. Like I just feel like because when I usually hear people talk about Big Bang, like at least in the way of like, oh no, like a lot like I don't know why people are fixated on the Big Bang specifically, because to me it's like it's just not even interesting actually.
Really? I mean, I think
heard a
it's
lot of
yeah,
people
like
say it's not related to scripture in any way specifically.
The more question is what gave way, like what caused the Big Bang, what happened before the Big Bang.
Sure,
to me,
yeah.
like the actual whether or not the Big Bang happened, to me personally, is not very interesting actually. I know that maybe that's unusual for
I mean, it's like the childhood story of our universe.
Yeah, but we already like concede that like once you get down to Planck time, you just can't know anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like okay, you could like it's almost like it's just a boring thing to talk about. It's like the real mystery is in that Planck time or in what happened at the instant of it or before.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like what it's just such a like it's I couldn't imagine a more like boring thing.
Yeah.
Like okay, there's paradoxical mysteries in the first few. There's paradoxical mysteries in the first few instants or the moment of and what happened before. But let's just like have a stupid discussion about like emergent physics after all the cool stuff happened. Like okay, have fun.
Well, I mean, if it's not
a waste
known,
of time.
If it's not currently known and we don't. Yeah, if we don't have the math to describe it, if we don't have any like empirical evidence to support one theory or the other, like how can we have a debate on something that's not known and might be not knowable?
What do you mean? Like, how could you have a debate on something that's there's tons of things that are not known and might not be knowable that we then figured out later, and debates on them are what drove us towards
but I mean, I can't have a debate on quantum gravity with like creationists. I mean, I might have
whoa, that you just completely changed. Hold on, I want to address your original question. That wasn't a good way. You said why have a debate on what's not known and what might not be knowable. It's like, well, because those are probably that's the most important kind of debate you can have. What do you like? That's what's driven like progression in every field forever. You just and you actually described it pretty eloquently. Like if I had to say, what's the most important kind of debate? It's the one on what's not known and what might not be knowable. Thank you. That was well said.
Yeah, I just don't know if I would think that that's. I mean, you know, it's important to push the frontiers of science forward in our understanding, but I don't think it's going to be a very productive debate if there's no.
It doesn't have to be
evidence-
productive if it's interesting and engaging.
If there's no evidence that we can point
if
to.
it's thought provoking, interesting, and engaging, then to hell with
Yeah.
being productive.
Well,
Listen, that's-
generally, my
It's
thoughts.
not an academic format. It's a YouTube channel.
That's
Right.
true.
So
Have fun with it, right?
generally, my thoughts are, you know, there's no something from nothing problem because you know the multiverse, but essentially. So that's my.
How does that make sense? What do you mean?
Because the energy in our universe is coming from a different universe.
Yeah, well, do you not realize of course, the response that would be when had the first universe in the multiverse had
Yeah,
the
the
origin.
first universe doesn't make any sense because to say first universe, that implies that there would be a universal multiversal time. But if time is a fact, like if time is only within each individual universe and there is no space from which, like there's no multiversal space time. So the question doesn't make sense.
Whoa! You got somewhere, then you aborted it halfway through, and then just said, "Did that make sense?"
Okay,
So,
so
no,
here's
no.
my conception. Okay, this is just totally my own speculation. Okay, since
I'm
you
all
want to talk
ears.
about these ideas that are, you know, not empirically demonstrable, and since you think that these are interesting topics, I'll just go through my own.
Because I'm the only one that thinks they're interesting. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, I'll just go through my own little ideas, right? I'm not saying that this is really how it is, but this is just how I like to think about things.
Of course, I wouldn't expect. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I conceptualize the multiverse as like Russian nesting dolls, right? Where you have one universe inside another universe, inside another universe, inside another universe, and
Okay.
each universe has its own space and time, right? So, like, our space and time might have had a beginning, but our universe is physically contained within another parental universe, which has its own space and time.
Why
So
aren't you getting an infinite regress paradox out of that?
Yeah. Well, there's tons of like fractals in nature. I would think that the nature of the multiverse would also be fractal. So it's self-same on any scale.
Well, no, the nature of the multiverse can be fractal. That's not really what the infinite regress is saying. Like the fractal pattern is a pattern, but the whole point of infinite regress is that if we experience obviously causal, like we have a causal chain of events, like you can't any coherent physical like statement, let alone theory, involves some sort of causal chain of events,
right? But if the multiverse,
so you're just hand waving that, yeah, but you can't just hand wave it. Multiverse therefore doesn't matter. Like what
I'm saying, that if the multiverse does not have its own time and space, right? It only has the time and space within each of the individual universes that makes it up. Then it doesn't make any sense to say what is the first universe, because
because you have to explain things
time.
as you comprehend. I might as well just say like there's a universe that's called Spaghetti Bob Jordan, the 13th alphabet from Ziggy Bob Jane James. Therefore, I don't have to explain.
I don't understand how this is an equivocation.
You're literally just saying, "Oh, multiverse doesn't abide by those rules." Next question, like what? You can't just do that. Like, what do you mean?
For there to be a first event, there has to be a time. And if there is no time that applies to the multiverse, if time only applies to
you can have a universe that time doesn't apply to. Why does it have to be a multiverse?
Why? Because that's how you wanted to know my thoughts.
No. Yes, and now I'm prodding your thoughts because it sounds like every time you're confronted with an actual paradox, you just sort of say, like, multiverse don't care. Honey Badger don't care. Multiverse.
Because
it could be a universe with all the same stuff you're saying. You're just hand waving it because it's inconvenient for you. It sounds like.
No, I'm hand waving because it's a multiverse. Like it doesn't have its own space and time.
Okay, why can't it be a universe without space and its own space and time?
That doesn't make any sense. How do you
Neither
have...
is multiverse without its own space and time.
Yeah, because it's a set of all sets, right? It's not there is no substance to the multiverse itself. It's only a collection of universes that each
and
have their
what
own
gave
space.
rise to the universes in the multiverse?
Yeah, each one has their own
Exactly.
individual space and time.
Well, then you're just invoking more infinite regress paradoxes. What do you mean? You're not solving the problem at all by just invoking the multiverse. The question is, how did
solved?
Whatever you invoke, the question is going to be, how did that thing come into existence?
Right, but if that thing has
how are you circumventing that?
You gotta
question?
Stop talking over people, man. You gotta.
Okay, how are you circumventing that
You're
question?
You're
still
talking over people. Stop.
Okay, but answer the question.
Be a normal human that can have a conversation without talking over somebody. Okay.
Okay.
So, if there is no universal time, then there is no first universe. There is no timeline for the multiverse.
No, you're saying nonsense, basically. Like, how that doesn't solve anything. As you understand anything in the world, I might as well just say, well, zero time hypothesis fixes that. Then you're like, well, what is that? You're like, it just fixes it. There's zero time.
Well, we know the universe has time and space. So
in zero time hypothesis, there's zero time. I fixed the problem. It's like, no, you didn't do anything. You just said, like, I can conceive of a condition in which it's no longer a problem. Problem solved. Like, what? No, like, what? That's not. How is that valid in any way, in any level? Like, what are you saying?
Literally asked me to speculate on what I think. So those are my
and your speculation is incomprehensible and makes no sense.
It makes sense to me. Why doesn't it make sense to you?
Because nothing is like follows. Like, you're literally just saying, like, the question is, how did this thing you're describing come into existence in the first place? Like, oh, multiverse, there's no time. There's no absolute time.
I think that's a very. I think that's a straw man.
That's literally what your argument was. It's not a straw man.
It's not. It's not. If you could try to steel man my argument just to demonstrate to me that you actually understand what I'm saying, that would be helpful.
Yeah, you're saying that, like, there's some kind of, like, relative time in the multiverse where, like, it's not one timeline from start to finish. It's the multiverse, so everything is relative. It's like that is an absolute cop out of an explanation to an incomprehensible paradox. Like, you're literally just saying, oh, there's some weird thing where it doesn't, like, the problem is solved. Like, no, I'm sorry. You experience the world through a causal chain. You don't get to just snap your fingers and say, well, in the multiverse, that's not a problem.
Yeah, well, why wouldn't it be? I mean, the causal chain applies to individual universes.
Yeah, it applies to anything arising. So how did you get the multiverse?
But the multiverse didn't arise. I mean, it's
well, okay. Now you're in infinite regress.
I mean, god damn, man, let me finish a sentence before you interrupt. Seriously, it's a problem with you. Look, oh god, dude, I even lost my train of thought. You're frustrating when you just constantly interrupt and talk over somebody, man. But
okay, go ahead.
Okay, so man, I don't even know what we were talking about.
Yeah, it's you hand waving something from nothing problem of matter.
Oh, wait, I understand. I figured.
Even though we know that matter cannot be energy cannot be created or destroyed, you're like, oh, multiverse is not a problem. Boom,
yeah,
done.
So I figured out what I was trying to say. Fractals are scale invariant, right? That means no matter what scale of time or space you're looking at, you're going to see the same pattern. If the multiverse is fractal in nature, then regardless of scale, there's no beginning and no end. There's no universal time that applies to it.
Yeah, that doesn't solve the problem that there is
no space that it is occupying. The multiverse would not be occupying any space.
So you're basically saying, like, you don't agree with the idea that matter cannot be created or destroyed.
No, what I just said was that energy cannot be created or destroyed because there's no beginning and no end to the multiverse.
Okay, so there's several questions that automatically. So, okay, there's no beginning or no end to the multiverse. Why is the energy not in a state of stasis?
Because it's a fractal in nature. It's not just like.
Why? What do you mean? It is? Like, what do you mean it is? Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so, like, within each universe, there are black holes, right? In my conception, each black hole would contain a simulation of a universe. So there is no, like, with its own independent space and time, right?
Okay, and why? And so you're gonna tie this into The universe being fractal in nature.
Yes, that would be the fractal pattern, is that you have a series of universes with black holes, which contain universes with black holes all the way down.
You're
and
just
all
saying
way
the
up.
same thing in different terms. First, it's a Russian doll thing. Then it's the
Yes.
multiverse. Then it's multiple
Yes.
black holes. This doesn't do it. You might as well just say like Jimmy Bob Thornton universe theory. Boom. I don't need to fix anything. Like, it's not like it is not a in any shape, way, shape, or form an actually coherent like even
Why
response
isn't it coherent specifically though?
because it's not addressing the actual paradox. It's just saying no. There's a set of conditions where it's no longer a problem. I'm like, well, how?
You did ask him
Just
to imagine that kind of set of conditions, though.
No, he said this is his like theory of how things are.
Yeah, my own idea for something that I consider potentially not knowable, and is
touch on that. Wait, rational
for...
empiricists, touch on that mistake you just made.
Huh?
The rational empiricist that I asked you to like conceive of things in this way, but no, I corrected it to like no. He presented that as Grayson presented that as like how he sees the world. Like
no, I very clearly did not, man.
What? Yes, you did.
Stop. I clearly said that this is potentially unknowable. This is not known. This is just how I like to think about things.
You didn't say I like to think. This is like you said. This is how I view things. Like
I said, this is how I like to think about things.
I don't think you said like to think. I think you said like this is how I view the situation.
This is what me and Grayson are kind of saying, though. If there's no empirical foundation, my speculation is kind of as good as yours. Is all we're gonna really get to.
Oh, then that's all I was asking for. Wait, yeah. So like, so you are saying that the Jimmy Bob Thornton universe is as good as everything Grayson just said. Then
I don't know what that means, but sure.
That's what you just said, right?
Like, about saying, dude, stop.
Oh, wait, that proved my point. No, I was still talking. I know. My whole point was that if nothing you're saying is like empiricists just said, like, well, it's not empirical, so my explanation is as good as yours. Yeah, so why are you trying to go in detail about how it makes sense that if it's a Matryoshka Russian doll thing, like,
didn't really
that's how we solve
specifically with mine is as good as yours. I meant more in the sense of that they're all also equally bad in that sense, because you can't really tell the difference.
That's what I said. Yeah, that's fine. That didn't contradict what I said.
Okay, well, at no point did I ever say that this is really true. Like,
oh no, you didn't say really true.
Wait, I'm not done. I didn't claim that there was any evidence to support this. I very much said this is just how I like to think about things. This is how I like to view it. It's not anything that I can prove or demonstrate. You wanted to talk about things that are unknown and unknowable, so that's why we're talking about this.
Exactly, and that's why I'm so confused that you like casually just said like, "Oh, for me, it's not a problem," because the question was, "Are you humbled by it?" And your response was, "No." Like,
yeah, I'm
so
not.
It's the combination of you don't know the answer, and it might be unknowable, but you're also not even humbled by the question.
Why would I be?
How do you square that circle? Like,
why would I be humbled by something that is not known? Like, we don't know about.
That's exactly what you should be humbled by.
That I don't know everything?
No, that there are unknowable things when you speak about a topic, like you know how it happened. So it's humbling to think, okay, I might know.
Conversation. We have been very clear.
You knew how it happened.
Yeah, we have been very, very clear that we have said it is unknown. We have been very clear that it said that it is unknown about the earliest instances of the universe, right? We've been very clear this whole time. We haven't made any knowledge claims about any kind of.
No, I know that. I'm not saying you did. I'm saying when I said, "Are you humbled by something from nothing problem?" I was juxtaposing that against the confidence you have about the after the Planck time and everything there. So I'm saying like fine, like you might know about all that like easy stuff after the Planck time, but I'm saying, are you not humbled by this stuff before? And then it seemed like you doubled down after you said no, and you just kept saying like, no, I just view it like this, and like Russian doll. Like,
so what are we disagreeing about exactly?
I guess at this point, I'm still asking, like, how are you not humbled by something so incomprehensible and paradoxical? Like, you just think it like, oh, one day we'll probably figure it out by just crunching more numbers, or
no? I mean, I clearly admitted that it might be unknowable.
I mean,
And so how are
maybe-
you not humbled by it? You have to be humbled by something unknowable. Like you can't not be.
I guess maybe it was just a misunderstanding
what
of
is
what
it-
you meant by humbled.
Yeah, humble as in like you can't you lose your sort of confidence in being able to figure stuff out because it's unknowable.
Maybe we should have
Like
defined
how do you
terms
not
at
get
the-
hump? Wait, what?
I said maybe we should have defined terms at the start.
What am I using
Yeah,
the
I
word humble
definitely
wrong?
misunderstood what you were trying to say. I thought you were saying that, like, how can you believe in any of this stuff, even though we have evidence to support a lot of it, if we don't know about the something from nothing first earliest instances?
Oh, well, I'm sorry. I mean, I'm thinking humble at no that like I wasn't saying like
So you're just thinking like when you go to the ocean and you get humbled by how big the ocean is, or something like that.
that's my understanding of the word humble. Yes.
Okay. Well, in that regard, sure. I mean, it's humbling to know that it might be physically impossible to know everything, or I mean, sure. I'll admit that it's humbling to be confronted with the earliest instances of the birth of our universe. Of course.
Okay, that actually was my entire question. I guess we just got derailed somehow.
Miscommunication.
That was definitely a miscommunication.
Yeah,
then.
that was a pretty big. Sorry, maybe it was my fault. I should have probably.
No, miscommunications
I
are
should have.
often both parties are involved in the miscommunication. So.
All right, fair enough. Fair enough.
And I don't dislike you, Sunflower. I just get frustrated when I feel like I can't finish a sentence before I'm being talked.
No, that's fair. That's fair. I was being jumpy. I don't know. I haven't been on a stream in a while, and I definitely came in here like, oh, I'm gonna cause havoc. I'm gonna wreak havoc.
We're probably all frustrated right now, to be honest.
But no, that's kind of funny though. Like that, I was actually talking about like more of like a confronting a giant like structure and feeling humble, not so. All right.
Yeah, because I mean, our point for most of the time was that there are aspects of the Big Bang that we have evidence for, like the cosmic microwave background or like the existence of quark gluon plasma. Like there are aspects of it that we do have evidence for and we can be confident about. But the very
I agree with that even. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but just because the very earliest seconds are unknown and like so unknown that we don't even have mathematics that's sophisticated enough to describe them. So yes, I will say that is humbling for sure. Rational empiricist, did you have any thoughts about that whole tangent where I just kind of was just talking about my wild ideas or whatever? Anything that seems like it doesn't make sense to you?
No, like I was saying, I mean, it might end up being true. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
Like I say, like without an empirical foundation, anyone's guess is as good as anyone else's. That's why we have to humble ourselves in that sense that we still have a lot to learn.
True.
Hey, bringing it back.
Well said. Yeah, poetic.
So is there anything
let this be a lesson to you kids out there that define your terms before you start a conversation.
Yeah,
Sure.
This is used as a lab instructional video.
Yes.
In 2097.
So before I wrap this up, rational empiricist, is there anything else that you wanted to maybe bring up, or you think?
No, I think that about covers it. What I want to talk about.
Yeah,
cool.
I'm gonna go later, guys.
See you, Sunflower. Yeah. So, yeah, that was a fun little derailment there. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I've at least heard everything that Sal's gonna bring up before.
I think that's the major things he's gonna bring up.
Yeah,
at least in my experience.
Well, I hadn't heard of the plasma redshift, so I'm gonna have to do some reading on that. But I feel like I could have adequately responded to most of the other points that we had discussed.
Yeah.
Like I have some background
Something
knowledge.
tells me you're probably not going to get to time dilation or anything that complex because of just time constraints and whatnot. But I mean, if it ends up being that way, I hope that helps it a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And there's like going to be, it's a 2-on-2. So there's the time is even more pressed.
Precisely.
And my partner is Leophilius. So I don't know, what percentage of the time I'll be getting to talk.
It'll be an interesting conversation. That's for sure.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm pretty excited for it. So
and I wish both of you the best of luck.
what I'll do is actually once I have written my opening statement, is it okay if maybe I like email it to you or something
Sure,
and
yeah,
let me know your thoughts?
I'll be happy to look over it.
Cool. Cool. And yeah, go ahead and send me those two papers, like the Crawford paper and then
Yeah.
um
You said it
yeah,
was
the
the 28th,
Hawkins.
right? So it's still got a little bit of time to do that.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I definitely want to check out those papers and the
Yeah,
responses to them and just sort of
for sure.
familiarize myself with some of those very niche areas. So
Yeah, no problem.
okay. Well, cool. Thanks, folks, for everyone that stuck through all the way to the end. This was a pretty long live stream for me, but I was really enjoying it pretty much the whole time. So big thank you for Rational
Thanks,
Empiricist.
everyone.
And thank you for everyone that came on, the atheists, the creationists, everyone that made it a good discussion, everyone in the live chat too. So I'm going to be signing off for now, but I've got a debate coming up in just 2 days. It's going to be on Standing for Truth's channel against T-Rock on the Age of the Earth. So we're going to be talking about a lot of fun things. He's going to be bringing up 5 main evidences that show that the Earth is young and not old. So it should be pretty entertaining. And yes, I will be uploading the debate onto my channel as well once I have the footage for that. So should be a pretty entertaining debate. Look forward for that this weekend. And then actually Nephilim Free canceled on me for March. So I'm trying to try to get that rescheduled. And then at the very end of February, look for my debate on modern day debates with Leo Phileas on the Big Bang. Maybe, some of you might hear some of the echoes from tonight's conversation come up there. So you'll be like the Leonardo DiCaprio meme pointing at your TV. All right, everyone. Signing off. Thank you very much.